Okay, good morning everyone. We'll get started. There's no fire alarm drill anticipated today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the signs above the doors. Make your way to the rear of the car park and wait there until you are told it is safe to return. Please make sure all phones are either muted or switched off. To start the meeting then, good morning everyone and welcome to this Strategic Planning Committee meeting on Wednesday the 11th of December 2024. I'm your Chair, Councillor Todd Olive. To my right is Vice Chair, Councillor Mike Howe. Supporting officers present are Ed Freeman, Assistant Director, Planning, Strategy and Development Management, Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor, Wendy Harris, Democratic Services Officer, and Matt Dickens, Planning Policy Manager. Can I remind everyone present, please, that this meeting is recorded for publication on the Council's website, so please can members and officers making a contribution to the meeting use a microphone or your comments will not be recorded. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members and declarations of interest. Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. So I will start with yourself, Councillor Olive.
I am present and I have nothing to declare at this time.
Thank you. Vice Chair, Councillor Howe.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Brian Bailey.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Present, no declarations, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Present, no declarations other than to say that I have had a number of canvassing emails from residents, notably from Broadclist.
Thank you. I'll come to Councillor Brown in a moment because he's just turned up. I need to log him in. Councillor Bethany Collins.
Present and no declarations other than lobbying emails.
Councillor Fernley. I'll quickly.
Present. Yes, I've also had lots of lobbying emails from Broadclist residents.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Young.
Present, I've had a number of lobbying emails.
Thank you. Councillor Levine will be with us a little later, and it's back to you, Chair.
Councillor Brown? We wouldn't want you to feel left out, Colin. For the record, Colin, do you have any declarations?
No.
Do you want to say that on the record?
No declarations, and I am present at last.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Sorry, Chair, could I just ask for non-committee members if they have any declarations as well? Councillor Rylance.
Thank you. So I'm Broadclist Parish Council, a resident of Broadclist, and I have received a number of lobbying emails from Broadclist residents. Thanks.
Sorry, Broadclist Parish Councillor and lobbying. And what was the other one?
And I'm a resident of Broadclist as well.
Thank you.
Any other members, anything to declare? No? Okay, thank you very much. We come then to agenda item 1, apologies. I have Councillor Ollie Davey written down, and I also bear apologies from Councillors Hayward and Ledger. Are there any other apologies folks wish to record? No? Okay, thank you very much, members. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest, we have already done. I have agenda item 3, declaration of interest as well, which obviously we have already done. So not sure what's gone on there. Either way, agenda item 4, matters of urgency, there are none, and agenda item 5, confidential or exempt items, there are none. Which brings us then to the main event, agenda item 6, the East Devon Local Plan Approval for Regulation 19 consultation. And we start that agenda item by coming to public speaking for this morning's session on chapters 1 through 5. And first on my list here, Councillor Martin Smith from Fennerton Parish Council. Good morning, Councillor Smith, welcome.
At item 6 on your agenda, you are being recommended to approve the Regulation 19 version of the local plan for publication. Now, before you take that step, I want to highlight some of the glaring internal inconsistencies in the applications of policy SBO1, SBO4 in the plan, and how those inconsistencies are at odds with the plan vision. Plan vision clearly states that for rural East Devon, there will be, and I quote, modest, sensitively planned development to meet the needs of local communities. You have now transparently altered the wording of the Spatial Strategy Policy, SPO1, from the Regulation 18 version, so that for Tier 4 settlements, it now reads, allowing limited development at the service villages, and have dropped any reference to meeting local needs. This was clearly a device to overcome the fact that for some Tier 4 settlements, including Fennerton, you have proposed within the plan more housing than is necessary to meet local need. The vision and the policy are now different, and neither is being applied consistently. Fennerton, a small rural village, is expected to newly accommodate 102 houses, the highest figure for any Tier 4 settlement, and it's also a greater number of newly proposed houses than for 3 out of the 5 in the Tier 3 above, which have far better access to jobs, services and infrastructure. This is not logical. This proposal is not consistent with the vision and the policy of the plan and will result in the promotion of unsustainable development. This is not sound planning. In addition, under policy SBO4, the plan proposes 4.64 hectares of land in Tier 4 Fennerton for employment use. This is a greater area of land proposed for B2 general industry and B8 storage and distribution than proposed for the whole of either Tier 1 Exmouth or Tier 2 Axminster, and more employment land in total than Tier 3 Ossory and Seaton combined. That cannot be right. Only 3 other rural villages have any employment proposed, and the largest is 1/4 hectare. Again, the spatial distribution proposed makes no sense, particularly as, unlike the other villages, the employment uses proposed in Fennerton are not restricted to office, but include general industry and storage and distribution. Anyone who has any experience of the country lanes that serve our village will know it's not remotely feasible that large commercial vehicles can sensibly access the area proposed. The scale of both housing and employment uses proposed for Fennerton in the plan cannot be justified, do not follow the vision, the policy of the plan, and are not founded on clear evidence base. I urge you, even at this late stage, to reconsider and not to publish an unsound plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Smith. Next up, we have Mr. John Hamill regarding Chapter 4 of the plan. You will want to switch the microphone off and on again to reset the timer. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning. I want to speak to you today in respect of Chapter 4, Site Selection. My name is John Hamill. I live in Dowditch Lane, which is in Tingtong. I'm aware that some of you were completely unaware of Tingtong. To assist you, the name probably derives from the Vikings and is a reference to public assemblies of men. Apt for today, it predates me, you, and East Devon District. Despite, however, you being unaware of Tingtong, at your meeting of the 3rd of September, you decided to allocate a huge parcel of land against the advice of your officers in and around Ting Tong. This land has the potential for over 1,000 houses. 1,000 houses, 4,000 people, 2,000 cars. There was no representation from the residents of Ting Tong at the 3rd of September meeting because we were totally unaware of the threat to our homes, our community, our ecology and our services. The officer recommendation to that meeting was not to allocate. We had no reason to suspect the manoeuvring that took place that morning to bring 20A into play. Other people obviously did, however, and I cannot fathom how Eagle Investments and Councillor Hall had the aspiration and foresight to be present. The notes of the Working Party meeting of the 26th of July tell us that EXMO 20A was not discussed at length. At your meeting on September the 3rd, the 11 committee members present gave the whole process from non-allocation to allocation just 17 minutes, another 6 minutes for 20B. By comparison, you took 28 minutes not to allocate EXMO 7, I beg your pardon, Limpston 7. 1,000 homes, 4,000 people, 2,000 cars in 23 minutes. Had we had the foresight to attend on September the 3rd, I would have asked you to consider just 4 things. 1, this is an SSSI. 2, it directly abuts the national landscape area of the Pebble Beds, 1 of 3 in the whole of Europe. 3, there is no practical safe access to the site. 4, the site is within 100 yards of Budley, less than 2 miles from the High Street. However, it's 4 miles from Exmouth High Street. The health, educational, social and utility services of Budley will not be able to cope. The proposer to allocate that day alongside Eagle Investment talked flowingly of infrastructure development. I say to you all, for years, go to Cranbrook and find a co-op and a chip shop. I therefore ask you to think again and think carefully about the allocation of EXMO 20. Give it the time it deserves and if necessary, revisit your plans. 1,000 homes, 4,000 people, 2,000 cars, SSSI, national landscape and a community that just will not be able to cope. -5, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Hamill. We come then to Mrs. Barbara Wetter. I hope I've pronounced that right, on chapter 5.
Good morning. I've been in Fennerton since 2014, and this village has continued to expand. It is not now the lovely village that I came and fell in love with. You don't know about our location. You need to come and see what we have to put up with, and I am more than happy to accommodate you. The proposed development for our small rural village, why is it bigger than every other village of the relevant size? I'd like to know that. The village is car dependent. We do have a rural bus every 2 hours if they run, but a mere flooding, ice on the road, we are cut off. We do have a bus to Honiton, but it's only twice a week. So we have no facilities, no infrastructure for the elderly. We've got a train station, not every train stops, they're infrequent, and we've now had bus replacement, which is adding to the chaos on the roads. I've had a terrible experience with traffic, hence I've ended up with a walking stick. And this is only going to have this development further impact. The roads are too narrow, the vehicles are eroding our hedgerows, the congestion with the big articulated lorries that are being sent through Fennerton by sat-nav. And this is only going to get worse with this development going through. We've got no pavements for the elderly or children to walk on the outskirts of the village. The NHS and Age Concern advise us to get up and walk so that we're not blocking the NHS. Well, I'm afraid I'm a statistic now. I'm blocking artery surgery, I am blocking the NHS physio, and I'm going to be blocking the hospital now. And all because of inconsiderate drivers using our little village for a short run. The roads we have are not fit to carry the today traffic. Now, this development would increase the housing. And again, many of the families coming are 2 vehicles. Where are they going to park? What are we going to have all this extra traffic? The school is at capacity and oversubscribed. And I can assure you, every school holiday, there is a repair van there. The drainage is not fit for present at the moment because I get these snotty letters from South West Water. So all this proposed development is going to add to it. You are eroding my quality of life if you pass this. You are eroding the heritage of the rural villages, and you are eroding the heritage of Devon, which, as born and bred, I am proud to be known as a Devonian. All I can say to you is if you let this go through, then all I can say to the committee and East Devon District Council is shame on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Wetter. Next, we come to Leslie Oates, again on Chapter 5. And again, you will want to reset the microphone there.
I just press the 19.
No, I've left it on.
If you just press the button twice, that will restart your time.
Which button?
On the right.
For context, I've lived in Devon all my life and moved to East Devon in 2017. My son is on a low wage, but currently pays £1,100 a month to rent a home for his family. So I'm well aware of the need for affordable housing and employment opportunities. However, I'm dismayed to see the disproportionately large level of development suggested for certain rural areas compared to that proposed in larger, much better resource settlements. Majority of our villages do not have the infrastructure to support further sustainable development. My concerns are the lack of effective, regular and reliable public transport, leading to obvious increased commuting by car and significant increase in commercial vehicles. More traffic will congest the network of the not fit for purpose lanes connecting our villages, likely increasing the risk of accidents, pollution, noise, further increasing anxiety, stress and ill health. Congestion will also increase difficulties of access for emergency vehicles. Additional traffic will surely contravene your objective of delivering net zero carbon emissions by 2040 and will not meet another objective of encouraging healthy lifestyles and living environments for all. On the 9th of December, MP Richard Ford discussed in Parliament that 57% of East Devon is made up of national landscapes and thus protected from development. He continued how this places an unfair burden on the remaining 43% of available area to accommodate targets. While I appreciate not meeting targets will impose penalties, should we not be fighting back rather than shoehorning developments into ridiculous spaces, putting us at risk, eroding our countryside heritage and wildlife? I believe the Council have already been made aware of the real threat to life posed by the constant discharge of raw sewage to residents by Dr. William Weir, Consultant for Infectious Diseases, and I'm concerned development will negate and waste the thousands of public money that is being spent on the flood alleviation scheme in Fennerton, highlighting alleviation, not cure. I sincerely hope that, as Labour Minister Matthew Pennycock promised, the Planning Inspectorate will vigorously test this plan, see sense and revoke some of the proposed developments due to the devastating impact it will have on some of our communities. Finally, despite residents being on the planning portal and reading local press, some miscommunications and ultimately the opportunity of speaking on our specific concerns recently. Please can I respectfully request East Devon District Council advertise meetings more effectively, remembering some members of the public do not have access to a computer or the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oates. We then have Mr. Thomas Shillito regarding Chapter 5. Okay, thank you. we will move through and see if he manages to make it in time then. Next up then, I have Dr. Lorna Mason on chapters 4 and 5.
Yes, because you're speaking on behalf of two other people, it's 6 minutes.
Good morning, committee. You're getting it in the neck from just about everywhere, I imagine, at this stage of your process. You've had your constituents bombard you with messages, you've got your government targets, and to be honest with you, I do have some sympathy. Your report for today's meeting tells us that this stage of the process is concerned with the council making the plan public, allowing people to raise challenges and objections. So 5 of us, soon to be 6, came here today to tell you that we do not live in a tier 3. We live in Broadclist Village. Now, we've heard that term used an awful lot in these meetings when justifying your allocations. Eleanor Rylance, who is here today, already told you she did not enter politics to make residents' lives worse. But we genuinely fear that with this plan, some residents' lives will be made much, much worse. We've heard statements in these meetings from some of you that make us question who or what it is you're representing. Chair, you've been explicit we cannot talk about individual allocations today. So instead, I will say something about Broadclist Parish. It just so happens that within the entire parish of Broadclist, the whole allocation is in our village, and we think it's really, really huge. Your plan tells us that rural East Devon will retain its outstanding charm and character with modest, sensitively planned development. Now, we know you've worked very hard on this plan, but we don't see that sentiment being echoed in our neck of the woods. Councillor Ingham, I've heard you say, what are we saying no to here, when encouraging your fellow councillors to vote in favour of an allocation that local people are up in arms about. And I've heard you, Chair, you said such and such a place must take some development, despite the fact that the place you were talking about has seen massive development in the past decade. And these comments have caused real upset for residents, who, I remind you again, do not live in Tier 3 settlements. We live in unique communities, each one with very unique challenges and also having their own very special character. And it's our opinion that some of the decisions made around this table in putting this plan together are likely to destroy the special character of some of these communities forever. Now, you know that land in East Devon is highly prized by developers. So what also concerns us, it's virtually impossible to see who the directors of some of these companies are. And our guess is they're almost certainly not living in the communities they want to build on. So what assurances, committee, will you give us that the companies you have heard from during this process, such as Land Value Alliance, offer robust enough layers of transparency as to who will actually profit from the sale of East Devon's land? Do you have sufficient safeguards in place to be utterly confident that none of the councillors around this table or sitting around any other committee table aren't being influenced by them? Now, it might sound like a big conspiracy theory, but East Devon District Council has had its fair share of controversy over the years, and financial incentives can be very powerful motivators. We all know that. The secretive behind doors meetings of your own working party in the lead up to your recommendations and the resulting lack of transparency around that part of the process displayed very poor judgment in our view. And finally, committee, in your own public consultation, you had more unhappy and dissatisfied constituents by a factor of 5 for one particular site than for any other in the whole of East Devon. And I made this same point to you before in the September meeting, but this fact was not recorded in the minutes. So we would like it put on public record that 370 people told you they were unhappy or dissatisfied with development at this location. And to make matters worse, the agenda pack for September's meeting told your own councillors that officers were enthusiastic about development in this same location. Now, this enthusiasm seems to have stemmed from one of your closed-door meetings mentioned earlier. So no wonder we all start to feel slightly suspicious about all of your processes. Now, if our responses to your consultation were expressed as a percentage of people living in the entire parish, rather than just as a percentage of people living in our village, it could explain why you may have concluded that Broadcliffe residents did not create much of a fuss. Well, we're trying to make you pay attention to us now, in as many ways as we can think of, and probably to the annoyance of all of you. But the fact is, we feel utterly powerless. Was the whole public consultation on sites simply an expensive tick box exercise? Because how could it be anything else? When you voted not only to include your most objected to site, but you've now increased the allocation above what your own officers and the parish council considered would be detrimental. Do you think that makes any sense to your constituents? Your plan tells us you will ensure that our towns and villages remain great places to live. How are you going to square this circle of contradiction, committee? How? The vision you have set out is one of sustainable development, appropriate in scale and character. Now ask yourselves whether this genuinely applies in each and every case, because all of us here are going to be watching you very, very carefully to see if you will honour this commitment. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Dr. Mason. Broadly, the comments that are being made in public speaking are for members of committee to consider when it comes to later on. But I wanted to pick up on, frankly, the accusation that anybody around these tables has a financial interest in any of these developments. It sounded very much like an accusation to me. I appreciate maybe it wasn't intended as such. To be very clear, participating in a decision in which a member has a financial interest is without declaring that interest and recusing themselves from the room, I believe I'm right in saying, Mr. Hunter, is a crime. If anybody here has done that, they've broken the law.
If any evidence to suggest they put it to the police.
With respect, and for the record, members of the public have just pointed out from the gallery that it was an observation, there was no accusation. With respect, if there's no accusation there, then why raise the point? You can't necessarily have it both ways. The folks that sit before you have been elected by you, they're accountable to you at the ballot box, and they're responsible by law for declaring their own financial interests. I may disagree with some members who are in this room quite frequently on some occasions. I trust all of them to have made the declarations that they need to make. If anybody has any evidence that that has not been the case, then please come forward with it. But respectfully throwing mud in that way does nothing to help anybody in these discussions. We're here doing our best, and to have that thrown at us is unpleasant. That's all I'm going to say on the matter. We then come to Mr. Duncan Cherritt regarding Chapter 5 of the plan. Okay, Councillor Collins, do you want to switch your microphone on, please?
I'd like to make a declaration in regards to anything that you discuss with Honiton, because I do know the landowners. So I'd like to make a declaration, please, in view of what was just said.
Okay, thank you. Sorry? Do you want to take it, David?
Sorry, councillor, could I just clarify what declaration do you wish to make?
Anything to do with Honiton.
So in relation
Because
to
I know
Honiton,
I know most of the landowners.
for the benefit of the members of the public, there's several declarations that councillors can make. They can either declare what's called a disclosable pecuniary interest, which means that the application will affect them and will affect their finances, because it's effectively their own application. If they don't do that, that is a criminal offence if it's found that they've failed to declare that. The other things that they can declare is that the matter in question directly relates to their finances. Are you saying that anything on this application or on this agenda today directly relates to your finances? Nothing, okay. So then the other thing that you can say is that some of these things may affect your finances in some way, or those of a relative or a close association. Are you saying that any of the things on this agenda today affect your finances in any way?
Well, I don't really know which ones you're going to discuss.
If at the
I don't understand
time,
the agenda.
If at the particular time you feel that there's something that will affect your finances or your well-being, you must at that stage declare an effects and non-registerable interest. If you believe that it will affect your finances and the members of the public believe that it will do so to an extent that your judgment would be clouded if you were making a decision, which you're not anyway today, then you must declare an effects and prejudicial non-registerable interest, and then you must leave the room. Other than that, you don't have anything to declare.
Well, I was just going to declare an NRI.
In respect of what?
I don't know, because I don't know what's coming up, do I?
Well, at this moment in time, then, I'd suggest that you can't declare anything, can you? But if you do feel that you need to in the future, when we get to that particular stage, please do so. Please let me know at that stage if you want some further guidance. But as things stand at the moment, I can't see what exactly it is that you want to declare. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hunter. Thank you, Councillor Collins. I've forgotten where I was. Okay, I was about to call Duncan, so I will call the next speaker, which is Councillor Richard Granger from Ottery St Mary. Good morning, Councillor Granger.
Well, I'm sorry that I'm going to have to add to the burden that has been so eloquently expressed by colleagues and members of the public. On the 11th of November, we, Ottery Town Council, sent a letter to East Devon District Council, and I'll now read it out. Concerns regarding the East Devon Local Plan Sites Identification and Process. Ottery St Mary Town Council wishes to reiterate the serious concerns expressed in Lympstone Parish Council's recent letter to East Devon District Council regarding the process of identifying sites for development under the East Devon Local Plan. The Council fully support the views expressed by Lympstone Parish Council as they reflect our own concerns about the undue pressure this process has placed on local councils, including Ottery St Mary, as well as the negative impact it has had on our communities. Like Lympstone, our parish has experienced significant frustration with the EDLP consultation process, which has placed a disproportionate burden on councillors. The lack of sufficient notice, the rushed timelines, and the absence of adequate time for reflection and meaningful consultation have undermined the effectiveness of the process. Furthermore, the failure of EDDC to engage in a more positive and collaborative manner with smaller councils has left many feeling sidelined and undervalued. The Council share concerns about the toll this process has taken on the mental health and well-being of parish and town councillors who are already working under considerable pressure to serve their communities. The additional demands of responding to a process that appears to offer little in the way of meaningful consultation or consideration for local opinion have only added to the strain. It is evident that the current planning process has been poorly managed and the communication between EDDC and local councils has been inadequate. The lack of empathy, leadership and understanding shown by EDDC has led to a feeling of frustration and betrayal in smaller communities where the views of local residents appear to be ignored or dismissed. In particular, we share the concern that the relentless pressure to meet government housing targets is being placed on communities without due regard for the limitations of local infrastructure or the preservation of open spaces. Rather than continue to impose unrealistic targets that damage our towns and villages, we urge EDDC to raise these concerns with the government and advocate for a more realistic approach to development, one that takes into account the capacity of existing infrastructure and protects the character of our communities. The Town Council strongly believes that the EDLP process must be revisited with greater consideration given to local views and a more collaborative approach to planning. We join Lympstone Parish Council in calling for a genuine review of the process and for more thoughtful, supportive engagement with the town and parish councils who are on the front line of this issue. And we hope that the EDDC will reflect on the concerns raised both by Ottery St Mary and Lympstone and take immediate steps to address the shortcomings in the current process for the benefit of our communities and the future of East Devon. And we are still waiting for a reply to that letter which was sent on November the 11th. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Granger. As we've had two public speakers, I believe, so far who've not been able to join us quite yet, members, do you wish to put... good morning, Mr Shillito. Just 1 second, please. We'll hear from Mr Shillito in a moment, but members, do you want to wait for Mr Sherritt to arrive before we proceed with the rest of the meeting after hearing from Mr Shillito? I do need a steer from committee on this one. Councillor... Indeed. It is 40 minutes since the start, yes, that's right. Okay, well, we'll hear from Mr Shillito and then we'll see where we are. Mr Shillito, your 3 minutes.
Councillors, you've been moving at a phenomenal pace, the hours you've put in. However, while you, the democratic side of East Devon, are able to pull out all the stops, the bureaucracy of East Devon has just not been able to keep up. Emails need chasing, weeks later, the public are completely in the dark about what's going on. When you look on your website, it's out of date, creating the utmost confusion. Seeing these Exmouth sites, I could not believe some of the decisions that you, councillors, have made. But when I looked into it, it's not you. It's the rushed information you've been supplied with from the planning department, the errors and omissions. The plans upon which you made these decisions show the land designations, national landscape, listed buildings, even unconfirmed wildlife sites, but omitted the highest designation of all, the European level designations of SAC and SPA, left off. How can you make an informed decision? For this glaring omission, Matt Dickens essentially said, we can choose what to put on, and we chose not to show the internationally important sites. You voted without the knowledge that the Pebblebeds Heath is both a SAC and an SPA, and you've put an allocation for a suburb the size of Woodbury next to it. This is the only double designated site in East Devon, in fact, throughout Devon. Nowhere on Dartmoor or Exmoor is as highly designated for wildlife. In fact, this is the only land-based double designated site in the whole of the southwest, and you're proposing 700 houses next to it, and the devastating recreational impacts on the ground nesting birds is well documented. But you were not informed. Nowhere in all of the HELAR paperwork, committee agendas and plans have I seen mention of the SAC and SPA. If you allocate Exmo 20, knowing that you're going against international and national regulations and East Devon's own nature recovery strategy, and even contradicts the Chapter 13 policies which within this local plan. Secondly, the Exmouth 20 map is wrong. It includes a whole load of houses, a church and a graveyard. East Devon has been alerted to this incorrectness countless times, but nothing was done until after the Working Party meeting and the 3rd of September committee, when you, councillors, made a decision for this site based on its large, attractive site to accommodate housing and employment and 106. It's now been redrawn, reduced in size by a third. But despite this material change, your decision, based on the incorrect large map, still stands. You, as councillors, were elected to be our voice. Ask why these things have happened, and ask yourselves, were you provided with the correct information such that you made an informed, sound and defendable decision? Natural England have not commented on the Exmo 20 site, as that consultation was done in the spring before this was a preferred site. I ask just one of you to have the conscience to know that this is not right, and that, similar to Budley 01, this site allocation should be paused until that consultation response. Matt Dickens said he'll do that if committee asks, so please ask. For the sake of the ground nesting birds, please ask.
Thank you, Mr. Shillito. I take the point that perhaps there was no mention in papers. I think I'd be extremely surprised if anybody in this room wasn't aware of those European designations and the importance that they have in legislation and for this planning process. And broadly, I'd agree with you. Members of this committee are not ignorant of the issues that we deal with in East Devon. Yeah, no, and I will take that point, and perhaps it should have been mentioned in those papers. But again, members of this committee sit on this committee because we're expected to know. Part of the role of sitting on this committee is that there's an expectation that actually you have regard to things that are not necessarily what is written down in front of you. Otherwise, what's the point of us being here? No, I didn't know where Ting Tong was. That's correct. I'm going to move us on. Sorry, Jeff. Fine. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple of questions which might help to drag things out a bit longer at this stage, if you want, because I really would like to know where we're going.
Sorry, Councillor Faithful, what are those questions relevant to?
Well, the first part is...
Are they relevant to one of the chapters?
Yes.
Then can we do them when we get to those chapters?
This is what I'm trying to sort out. Will we deal with it? Because there's an issue of wording at Tipton. You did say there was a comment saying there's no changes to the sites, but there's an issue with the wording for Tipton, and there's an issue with Ottery 20 as well.
Then we'll deal with that when we get to the relevant chapter, and we will go through chapter by chapter once we've concluded public speaking. The last thing that I wanted to highlight while we hang on for a second to see if Mr. Cherrett is able to join us. We're frequently asked why we don't fight against the targets that are imposed on us by government. We do regularly, every opportunity we get. I wanted to make that very clear. If you go to the agenda papers from the 11th of September, just as one example of this, you will see one of the papers in there is our response to the changes that the government proposed to the MPPF. One of the questions that they posed as part of that consultation was, do you have any additional comments on the proposed method for assessing housing needs, on the mutant algorithm, as it's known? Our response there, expertly drafted by Mr. Freeman, was we would question the logic of a standard method that pays no regard to the capacity of a place to accommodate growth, either in terms of the environmental constraints in an area and also the capacity of the infrastructure to accommodate it. And we go on. We make those representations more or less verbatim every few months, pretty much whenever we have the opportunity to say something to government. In response, this is what we get back, and I'll quote here from a BBC News article on the 2nd of September. Angela Rayner said, I've just lost it, her comment was on it being put to her that the vast majority of all local authorities in the country, whether run by Labour, Conservative or Liberal Democrat administrations, had called the proposed targets that they set out unrealistic and impossible to achieve. Her response to that was, we've got a housing crisis in this country, and therefore I make no apologies for the mandate that we were given to deliver the homes that people desperately need. That's the brick wall that we find ourselves running up against on a regular basis. If we had more power to decide what and where we build, how much of what, then rest assured we would be using it. Mr. Sherritt, is that you're right on time? Your 3 minutes, please.
So I'm just, welcome, thank you. Hello, Chair. Hello, everybody. I wanted to speak a little bit on Chapter 5, which is about towns and villages. And it wraps in where I'm looking at, we have decisions to make about housing for the future, and I recognise that. We have decisions that we have a major town that's been built from scratch over the years, and we have another major town coming on the outskirts of Exeter that is going to obviously come towards our targets. But when we're looking at towns and villages, I see a distinct kind of contradiction between one part of the plan which talks about our aspirations around climate change and our aspirations around protecting and the well-being of existing residents. But at the other hand, the decisions that seem to be made around some of these sites, in specific to areas where we're talking about protecting heritage buildings or protecting and making sure that we have the infrastructure to go with it, at the moment they're just sentences. And I feel that maybe this stuff goes on in the background, but with the lack of clarity within these things and the lack of detail around facts, then it leaves us very much questioning, and hence the reason why these sort of things carry on, where we are continually dragging and asking you to provide the evidence of why a decision was made. So I'll give an example. You're proposing to build 142 homes or allocate a space for 142 homes or 100 homes in a historic village in the Doomsday Book, right next to Grade 1 listed National Trust buildings. But there's nothing in there other than saying, oh, we'll do our best to stop there being flooding, rather than showing the facts of actually what is going to be the impact of building that. So an example would be, you build 142 homes, you are going to be displacing 14,745 litres of water from the water table by building. That's including roads, utilities and houses on a site that size. That has to be passed somewhere. Now, I know you put in place sustainable mitigation, but you don't see that at the moment. All we're seeing is a line saying, I will do our best to stop it. And the problem is that what you're presenting is what feels like lip service to the existing residents whose homes and well-being will be irreparably damaged as a result of building for future people, which we do know, okay, homes. And I just think that is a contradiction in terms of where you're saying, in one hand, we want to look after our existing residents, but on the other hand, just deal with it and get on with it, and maybe the flood won't come, maybe it will come. We already know, for example, Townend is already a flood risk zone. You cannot get flood insurance on that street. We already know that it is lapping up and coming into people's homes in the existing state. You know that also when you build on Site 29, you will have surface runoff. So until you see detailed, factual evidence with the maths that can be done that shows how you will mitigate or how anyone will mitigate it. So my argument or plea to you guys is, if you're going to have planners and developers come in, at that initial stage, we would like to see that you press hard for the real evidence rather than saying, oh, we'll just do it. and we'll just find a way. Because quite often the way isn't found. And you see on the news time and again the devastation that it causes to local people, what's going on in Wales and the floods. And actually that is contradictory to what we're trying to say about there's no point having a net zero as our target when everyone's houses are underwater. It just doesn't work. So I would really ask for you to put that in place, and for you guys as the committee to be given the actual facts as a representation of what those impacts will be when you're displacing 14,000 litres of water from one patch of land to another patch of land, and what impact that will have when you have heavy rainstorms and flooding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cherritt, for those comments. As you've mentioned the example there specifically of flood risk and impacts on drainage and the like, that's possibly a good point for me to clarify what we're doing as part of this process. The local plan fundamentally is about the principle of development. What we're saying when we allocate a site in the local plan is, in principle, some building here of within whatever constraints we set out within that policy is okay from a strategic perspective. The sort of issues yourself and many people have brought up through this process are things that fundamentally as an authority we absolutely are concerned with and do look at in an awful lot of detail, but at the next stage of the process, when a planning application comes in, when it hits the planning portal and it gets a reference number and it goes out for consultation, that's the stage at which we look at that detailed evidence and all of the engineering calculations and all of that, because that's the process that's set out in law. That may be part of the flaw. There are some areas where we do look in more detail at sites where there are specific designations, specifically around flood risk. So if it's flood zone 3B or if it's part of a critical drainage area designation, then there are additional steps that we have to take during this process to satisfy ourselves. But the majority of the time, that sort of detailed analysis comes at the planning stage, which is another process that this authority operates. And whether you agree with that configuration, I see a lady at the front shaking her head, whether you agree with that as the process or not, that's the legal framework that we're stuck with. We don't have a choice about doing it that way. So I thought it was just, I'm I'm gonna move us on because I don't want to. I've seen Ottery 20. I live in Wimpole, just down the road. I have. Okay, I'm going to move us on then to consider the remainder of the agenda. I'm sorry, sir. Please, can you stop disrupting the meeting? Thank you. We're going to move then on to the substantive agenda. First, we're going to hear a report from Mr. Freeman, which will go through all of the papers that are in front of you today, members. And then, as I was saying to Councillor Faithfull a minute ago, we're going to go through chapter by chapter to consider any issues that are arising. With that then, Mr. Freeman. Just a moment, members, we're having some technical challenges. We're going to break for 10 while we sort the tech out, so we'll resume at 10:05. Okay, thank you, members. We will pick up now with Councillor Rylance has pulled rank as the chair of the council and wishes to just add 2 minutes worth. Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for calling me early because I actually have to leave. So I wanted to speak in a very general fashion, obviously, because we are not actually discussing specific sites today. The first thing I wanted to say was I wanted to pay tribute to colleagues who are sitting on this committee who have sat through 8 to 10 hour meetings several times a month for the last 6 months in order to get ahead of the new government housing targets, which would impose even more houses on our area and make it even more difficult to deliver the allocation we have. So, as I said in a previous meeting, I didn't go into politics to make people's lives worse. And so understanding that we absolutely need to be delivering more houses for the natural population growth of our towns and villages, and that there are many young people in our towns and villages who are what we call hidden homeless, as in they cannot leave home because they cannot afford to go and live anywhere else. So they are staying with their parents into their 30s. We need to be delivering genuinely affordable houses in our towns and villages in order to permit family groups and family support systems to stay together. At the moment, what we have in the previous local plan is a system where young people are being, forgive me for the word, but ghettoized into particular communities where practically everybody is young and there is practically no grandparent figure or parent figure. For example, Councillor Blakey will know this, for 2 censuses running, Cranbrook has been 20% under 4s. So when people say, where are all these people going to come from? There is a significant chunk of these people who will be living in our area who are not yet born. And what building houses that are genuinely affordable does is it permits people to start their adult lives. What we're doing at the moment is we're keeping young people in a situation where they cannot start their adult lives. They are dependent on their parents. It is an extremely frustrating situation for everybody, for the parents and for the young people. And what we need to be doing is focusing on delivering houses that young people can afford, and that they can afford to stay near their family, near their parents and their grandparents as they age, so that everybody can support everybody else. So the principle of building houses in villages should not be in question. What I am concerned about, and I know concerns a lot of people, is that historically infrastructure has been quite slow in coming ahead alongside these houses. So we need to be delivering infrastructure at least contemporaneously with any development that we make anywhere across the district, because those are the biggest stresses. And, you know, my inbox is full of emails which are essentially about the slow delivery of infrastructure. So in considering any allocation at a future date, and I do trust that colleagues later, when considering specific allocations, will request that conditioning does not make people's lives worse, as requested, that we consider the flooding as requested by Duncan Sherritt, that exits onto roads are properly considered so they don't make people's lives worse, that school places and doctor surgeries, a proper dialogue takes place with the other infrastructure providers so that we can grow harmoniously as communities. And I would trust colleagues later in the process to abide by all this for every single of these new developments. But I will hope that people will not kick against development because we need it for our natural population growth. But I would also hope that we consider the needs of all the people, both existing and future, including the needs of the very small children who will be appearing in these developments, and that we make these developments work for our local populations. And so, although we're not discussing specific sites today, and I think that must be underlined, we also have to pass this plan. It's crucial that we pass this plan, because if we don't, then we're back to square one with bigger housing numbers. And finally, I'm going to slightly pull rank at this point as Chair of Council, and I would like to pay tribute to all my colleagues who have sat through these enormous meetings at great personal cost, actually, because some people have had to miss days and days and days of work over the last 6 months in order to produce a plan that will pass the next stage and go on, hopefully. So growing is not an option. We have to grow because we have a growing population. But how we grow is up to us now and going forwards and at future planning meetings and future planning decisions. So thank you very much to colleagues, and please help us all make decisions which are rational and calm and deliver the best results for residents. Thank you, and I'm really sorry I have to go now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rylance. Mr. Freeman, is the text sorted?
I hope so. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members.
No, we were going to proceed with the agenda. I'd prefer to move on with the agenda, to be honest with you, Councillor Ingham. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. So, moving on to the report, which relates to the approval of the Regulation 19 consultation on the local plan. I've pulled together a few slides which I thought might be helpful to illustrate the key points from the report. I wanted to start off with a sort of reminder of sort of how we got here and where we're going. So I wanted to point out we've obviously been on this journey for some time now. There was the issues and options consultation back at the start of 2021, in which we set out that we were going to produce a new local plan, what the main issues were and options for addressing them. There was a consultation on that for 6 weeks. And we fed back the responses we had to that through to the committee. We then moved on and produced a draft plan, the Regulation 18 version of the plan, which first went out to consultation at the end of 22 through to early 23. And we had a second round of consultation in the spring of this year. We had thousands of responses to those consultations, all of which have been summarised and brought through this committee for members to consider and to inform your decision making. Members will also be aware that over the last 3 to 6 months, we've had a series of meetings of this committee to consider site allocations and policies in the plan. So everything that's before you today in terms of the site allocations, the policies and drafting of the plan, you have seen at least once before and commented on and informed and made decisions on. We are now at the Regulation 19 stage and seeking members' agreement for a Regulation 19 plan to go out to public consultation. The intention is to launch this consultation in January as things stand. As members will be aware, we've been waiting for the new, or our timescales have been affected, shall we say, by the draft National Planning Policy Framework consultation we had earlier this year, which indicated some substantial changes to the government's planning policy and the housing numbers, as Councillor Rylance has alluded to, with the potential for our housing numbers to increase by over 200 homes per year if we don't progress a plan under the transitional arrangements, which, based on the consultation, gave us a month from publication of the National Planning Policy Framework to publish a Regulation 19 version of the plan. I think the current expectation is that the NPPF will come out later this week, which will give us potentially a month, depending on the transitional arrangements that are within that document. So we need to be ready, and the intention is that we will have that ready to go out within a month. Going forwards from there, members will be aware that you've now resolved to do a 2-stage Regulation 19 consultation. So consultation on the draft plan would be stage 1. There would then be a consultation next spring, early summer on the new town. So this is the master plan work that's ongoing in terms of the second new community and work on the Greater Exeter Transport Study that is informing that work and any other key evidence documents that are still outstanding at that time. With a view to then collating all of that feedback and consultation responses and submitting to the Planning Inspectorate in autumn of next year. The timetable obviously gets a little hazy from there because we're in the hands of the Planning Inspectorate, but looking towards public hearings late next year, early 26, and adoption perhaps towards the end of 26. So we've been on a long journey already, and there's still quite a long way to go, and quite a lot of issues still to resolve in terms of the new NPPF and getting this consultation live. So just moving through the report that's before you, we obviously had discussion at the previous meeting about the housing monitoring report and the housing situation. As has been discussed, the allocations in the plan we have now modelled in terms of a trajectory for their delivery, which is one thing that we need to present as part of the plan. This is, again, an ongoing piece of work, but I think this graph does illustrate the issue that I think we were discussing to some extent at the previous meeting in relation to the housing monitoring report about how we get to a point where we have a 5-year housing land supply at the point of adoption of the plan, which is a requirement for the plan to be found sound. And you'll see from the graph that our predictions in terms of delivery trajectory, in terms of completions of homes over the next 5 years, shows quite a shortfall, particularly in 25, 26 through to 28, 29, and then a substantial uplift because at that point we have the sites that are allocated in the plan coming forward. So fundamentally what we need to do is shift some of what we have in the green part of that graph in the years 29, 30 onwards, forwards into the first 5 years of the plan through consents. And this illustrates the point I was making last time about how those sites that are now coming through the application process that have been considered as allocations, we now need to try and move some of those forward, assuming those applications are acceptable in their own right and address the detailed issues that have been raised. So I thought it was important to make that point and show that context in terms of where we're going, what we're trying to achieve. So what you've got in front of you is, in the covering report, is a summary of some of the main changes that have been made to the drafting of the plan since you saw the chapters in some of the previous meetings. So you'll see from paragraph 6.4 through to paragraph 6.21, we sought to summarise the responses, members' comments that were made through previous committees on those chapters and the changes that have been made to the plan as a consequence of that. To pick out a couple of key things, particularly in relation to the new community, which I think is one of the most significant changes, you'll see that policy WS01 now sets out a vision for a new town of at least 10,000 new dwellings. This is to align with the new government's New Towns programme, which members will be aware relates to new towns of 10,000 homes or more. The intention here is that the plan allocates 8,000, which is what we said all along we would do, but it sets out a vision for at least 10,000, which would go then beyond this plan period. Indeed, the 8,000 was always going to go beyond this plan period. Now that we've extended the plan period to 2042, it's now envisaged that we would deliver around 3,300 homes during the plan period. We're then allocating a remaining 4,700 to be delivered beyond that, and then a vision, as I say, for the total of at least 10,000, which would come forward in future development plans. In some cases, not just the next development plan, but the one beyond that, because I think it takes to about 2055 to build out the 8,000 that are proposed to be allocated. And linked to that, we've been doing some further work with consultants and solicitors who've been helping to advise us in terms of new community and the government's New Towns programme in terms of the text of the policy that seeks to allocate the new community. And so there are some further tweaks to what's within the agenda that's before you today that I just want to talk you through. The first of those is a further amendment to policy WS01, which relates to stewardship. So this will be a matter close to Councillor Blakey's heart, I'm sure, at Cranbrook, where these have been issues and has led to action from the Town Council there. So the intention here is to add these words to the policy that's in the printed text about establishing a robust and sustainable new town-wide stewardship vehicle and governance early on in the planning and delivery process. This would be done through a stewardship statement, and the wording goes on to talk about the details that would be included in that. But this is about addressing issues about stewardship of assets from early on in the development. This is again one of the lessons from Cranbrook, where assets such as open spaces and community facilities were originally to be put into a management company and covered in an estate rent charge. That creates unnecessary cost and uncertainty for the community and doesn't give them the ownership of those assets and in terms of decision making as well. So this is about ensuring we have an appropriate, robust and sustainable stewardship vehicle from the early days of a new community and hopefully don't have the situation that we've had at Cranbrook where the community have subsequently stepped in and taken on responsibility for those assets through the Town Council. So I'd ask members to consider the wording on the screen there as part of a recommended change to policy WS01. A further change as well to the printed pages is I'm now recommending an additional policy be added into the plan as well. So this is a policy specifically about phased developments. So again, this comes out of discussions with consultants and solicitors, particularly in regard to the new community, but I think this is relevant to a number of large-scale developments that are in the plan, and is about ensuring the phased delivery of infrastructure and services and a joined-up approach between different phases of developments. So on large-scale developments, we quite regularly see these developments broken down into phases or parcels where different developers are delivering different parts of that development. And this can lead to issues in terms of joining up things like pedestrian routes, cycling and vehicular access between the different parcels. Developers don't necessarily want to play ball with one another, and so can make life difficult for each other if not appropriately controlled. And the same in terms of services and delivery of electricity, water, sewage, broadband and district heating networks, and ensuring that they build these services and infrastructure up to the boundaries of the site so that the adjoining developer can readily access and connect into those without us getting into situations of ransom strips and similar arrangements that lead to delays in the delivery of development and unnecessary expense, or indeed retrofitting, where we end up with the road being dug up that was only laid months earlier on the adjoining phase. So I'd ask members to consider the wording that's on the screen as an additional policy to be added into the plan that seeks to address those issues. Appreciate we may need to come back to that text later on. The other thing I wanted to pick up on that's covered in the report is the two sites that through your deliberation on allocations were delegated to myself in consultation with the chair to resolve in terms of their inclusion in the plan, or rather the form in which they're included in the plan. And one of these is Budlow 1, site at Budleigh Salterton, which members will recall lies within the national landscape and within a green wedge that seeks to separate Budleigh Salterton from Knoll Village. So the discussion at the time about this site was that the least sensitive part of the site was the north-eastern corner of the site, which was sort of this, hopefully you can see on the screen, this sort of corner of the site. And members agreed to allocate a part of the site, which was to be agreed under delegated powers, for up to 50 homes. Through further discussions with the site owner and their agent, this is a plan that we were presented with that sought to address those issues. And you've heard at previous meetings from the agent, Iestyn John, including at your previous meeting, and I think he circulated this plan to you all before that meeting. So you'll see from the text in the report that this doesn't really follow what we had in mind, I don't think, as a committee. Members may recall that this was always a site that of late we haven't been recommending for allocation. I think at the time of the draft plan we had it as a second choice site, and then through further consideration we withdrew from that position and weren't recommending its allocation, but the committee felt that Budleigh Salterton should be taking more development than it was, and this site was put forward as a say for 50 homes. We have concerns as officers in terms of the extent of land that's being taken here. I think there are 53 homes on the plan, but across 3 fields rather than the one that was being discussed at the meeting. And we have quite strong concerns as officers about the landscape impact of this, particularly looking across from a footpath close to the coast by the golf course, where you look across at the same level as this site and look into this area, which currently creates quite a clear visual separation between Budleigh Salterton and the village of Knoll. We feel the extent of this starts to erode that arrangement, impinges on the landscape and the national landscape, and would be quite hard to justify as an allocation in the context of it being development in the national landscape, where we believe we can meet the housing numbers without needing to allocate this site. I think part of the reason why this site ends up as proposed on here, as I pointed out when this was previously being considered, that in order to access this part of the site, the only way to access it is through a road off Bedlands Lane at this end. So you end up running a road right the way through the site in order to access that, because it cannot be accessed from Dark Lane, I think it is, down here. And so in order to make that viable and deliverable, you obviously need some frontage development along that road. I think that's been stretched in terms of what's being proposed here and the extent of development in these two fields. But our recommendation is that we do not proceed with an allocation at Buddle 01, and that is not included in the Regulation 19 plan. The other site that was delegated was Honey 18, land at Kings Road, Honiton. Members may recall the issue here was about gaining access onto the Axminster Road, I think it is at that point, or Kings Road, I think it changes, just across the frontage of the site. And members resolved effectively to allocate this site for up to 136 dwellings in the event that a suitable access could be formed. We've had further discussions with National Highways, it being a classified road. Their view is effectively that they believe an access can be created, but only by moving the national speed limit further out of the settlement, further, so that there's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit across the frontage of this site that would obviously reduce the visibility space that would be needed. Indications from discussions with them are that they would be content with that in principle, as long as the police are comfortable with the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in that location, and discussions with the police have confirmed that they would be happy with that. So we feel we have sufficient comfort now to come to the view that an access can be achieved in this location and the site can be included within the plan. So the proposal is that this one actually doesn't need a resolution from the committee because it was delegated to myself in consultation with the chair to include it. So really I'm updating members on the position that this one is intended to be included within the Regulation 19 version of the plan. And finally, a site that members did agree to allocate is Otto 02 at Otterton. Apologies, the plan on the left-hand side of the screen is quite busy, but it does illustrate the issue with this site. So this was a site that the committee agreed to allocate for up to 8 dwellings, contrary to officers' advice. And the issue that's raised is in terms of the strategic flood risk assessment. So you may remember from discussions in other locations about the sites that went through the second stage of the strategic flood risk assessment, which is required for sites at areas at high flood risk or within critical drainage areas. We hadn't put Otto 02 through that process because it wasn't a site that as officers we were recommending for allocation. We've now spoken to consultants about that, and we're talking about a bill of over £10,000 to do that work for a site of only 8 dwellings. And as a committee, you have subsequently resolved to include that site within the settlement boundary of Otterton. So actually allocating the site achieves relatively little because it would be within the settlement boundary where the principle of development would be acceptable anyway. So rather than doing that additional work, my recommendation is that we actually omit Otto 02 as an allocation within the plan and just accept that it can come forward anyway because it will be within the settlement boundary and the principle would be acceptable. So where does that leave us in terms of housing numbers, I hear you cry? In terms of the total allocations proposed, you can see this is an update of the table that came to you a couple of meetings ago. So effectively, our target plus 10% buffer for the plan 2024 to 2042 was 22,539 homes. With the omission of Buddle 01 and Otto 02, we would have allocations amounting to, in addition to the windfall projections and commitments on the table, we'd have a total amounting to 22,536, leaving us 3 homes shy of the plan requirement plus 10%, which I think is a reasonable position to move forward and present for examination. So just turning to the recommendations in the report, as a result of all of this, there are some slight amendments, particularly to recommendation 1 within the report, which I've highlighted in red. So you see recommendation 1 I'm now proposing would read that Strategic Planning Committee approve the publication draft of the plan as appended to this report with the addition of the proposed text to cover stewardship arrangements as part of Strategic Policy WS01 and the proposed additional policy on phased development, delegated authority to be given for the Assistant Director of Planning Strategy and Development Management in consultation with the Chair to make adjustments to tidy up and refine local plan text wording to ensure consistency of approach through the plan, edit down over long text and correct typographical errors. As some of you have already pointed out, the odd typo and spelling mistake. We have read through the plan on goodness knows how many occasions already, but inevitably in a document of this size, there are still going to be small typographical errors and things that need to be corrected. So important that we have delegated authority to do that. I should also point out that the plan you have is fundamentally just the text. We haven't done much in the way of formatting yet, so the intention is to do some formatting and beautifying of the document before it goes out to consultation. There simply hasn't been time to complete that part of the process as yet. The remaining recommendations remain as in the report, so I won't read those out, and no doubt we'll come to those in due course, but they do include, as I've mentioned, resolving not to allocate Buddle 01 or Otto 02, and fundamentally seeking members' agreement to commence consultation on the plan as set out in the report. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. How can you possibly already have a question, Councillor Young? So before I come to Councillor Young for questions then, just a brief comment on how we're going to do this logistically today. Members will be aware the plan is broken down into individual chapters. The agenda reflects a split in the day. So for this morning's session before 2 o'clock, we will be going through chapters 1 through 5 to consider any comments that members have. And then for the afternoon session, we'll start with a short public speaking session there, and then we'll go through the remaining chapters 6 through to 18 and also the 2 appendices, apparently. So hopefully that makes sense. The 5 recommendations that you have, the 2 on specific sites we will consider when we get to chapter 5, to which they are relevant. The other 3, which consider the whole plan, we will take at the end of the session once we've been through all of the chapters. So if that makes sense to everyone. I see no objections. So, Councillor Young, your question, what's it relevant to, please?
I've got 2 questions. First question is, as I read it, is it correct that without submitting the new local plan, we haven't got the ability for a stepped increase in housing numbers? Now, basically, if we don't present a new local plan, we haven't got this ability of doing this stepped increase, and therefore then we can demonstrate a 5-year land supply.
So, Mr. Freeman, I think I'm right in saying the stepped increase is to get us through examination and having a sound plan. The normal 5-year housing land supply requirements still apply when it comes to development management and paragraph 11D?
Yes, that's right. So there's 2 slightly different things here. One is sort of the 5-year housing land supply position which requires consents. So allocations don't automatically mean consents, but obviously if you allocate a site, it then encourages developers to make an application and for those to come in. So it's a step on the journey to that site being delivered, which is important in terms of bolstering our housing and supply position. But as I said, when I had the trajectory on the screen, we need to turn some of those allocations which are proposed in the plan into permissions earlier to bank those permissions and bolster our housing and supply position. In terms of the trajectory, and perhaps go back to it on the screen, we are exploring this issue around the step trajectory to help with this issue and potentially saying that in the early years of the plan, we would only be aiming to deliver perhaps 800 homes a year and then proportionately increase the latter years of the plan. This is an argument that's been used by other authorities in terms of their trajectories being presented at examination, and we think that there is a strong case for doing that in this circumstance, particularly because we have the second new community coming forward in the district, where obviously we are going to see a step up in delivery when they break ground at that development and homes start being delivered there. So we're exploring that option. I haven't got that step on the trajectory as yet because we're still working on that and how that would work. And obviously this is an ever-evolving picture as applications come in and consents are given. So we need to see where we get to. I think in an ideal world, we would see those columns in 25, 26 through to 28, 29, increasing through consents alongside potentially considering this step trajectory option as well.
Was that both of your questions, Councillor Young? Or?
Yeah, that answers the first question, which basically we won't be pushed by developers that, claiming that we haven't got a 5-year land supply when we have the new plan published. That's my main concern. The other question was, it can wait until we discuss the Budley one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Young. Before I come to, I think Councillor Jess Bailey had another general question, but before I do that, I've been told off by my Vice Chair because I forgot to come back to Councillors Levine and Ledger, who joined us slightly late, to check whether they had any declarations.
The only declaration I have, Chair, is that if anybody is offering cake, I forfeited 2 slices for being late.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Levine. Councillor Ledger?
None that I'm aware of, Chair. There was a member of the public that I know, but I don't know whether that's a declaration that I would have to make. No.
Mr. Freeman, Mr. Hunter's shaking his head.
Support associate that's involved with something.
No, okay, all right, thank you very much, and thank you, Vice Chair, for reminding me. Councillor Jess Bailey, any other general questions before we come to Chapter 1?
Thank you. It is a general question. What are we going to be publishing apart from the plan when we go out to consultation? Will we be publishing all of our evidence base that we've been working on since we did the last Regulation 18 consultation? So that's my first general question. And my second general question is, I'm not clear, and maybe I've missed it, where the actual, the wider plans are. So not the town or village specific plans, but the more general plans that show things like the green wedges and other spatial policies.
Through you, Chair, yes, so we will be, we're putting together an evidence library which would go live at the same time as the consultation and have links to all of that. Obviously, a lot of that's on the website already, but we'll try and organise that in an easy-to-access way alongside the consultation materials. In terms of the plans, I should have mentioned we did republish the agenda on Friday, I think it was, with maps of the main settlements, which are on the website. But what we're working towards is an interactive map so that people can interactively access a map of any part of the district and see all of the relevant boundaries and everything that's in the plan. So that will be available to go live with the consultation. If members want to see where we've got to with that, Mr. Dickens does have access and we can show that to members now or later in the meeting if members wish.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd seen the maps for the settlements, but so for instance, you can see the edge of a green wedge, but you can't actually see the extent of it because we've only. So talking in terms of West Hill and Ottery, you can see it on the edge, but you can't see the wider, the full extent of it. And that does slightly concern me that, I think we do need to see that and all be happy with that. So I don't know how that can be, whether we can look at it in a minute or later on or sometime.
So through you, Chair, essentially, as I see it, apologies we weren't able to have sort of an overall policies map. As I say, I think is better presented in an interactive way, and that's what we've been working towards. So we can demonstrate that for you if members want to see that at this point. But the boundaries are effectively what you've agreed through the process of the previous meetings. So the interactive map just brings everything together into one place with a series of layers that people can turn on or off depending on what they wish to view. So I'm in your hands, committee. If you want, we can put that live. I think Mr. Dickens is ready to share that if you wish, and we can zoom into any location and show you just what that looks like, so you can have comfort that that's as agreed. In fact, it's live on the screen now. I think that's Ottery St Mary, isn't it, Matt?
That's very nice. Well, I shouldn't say nice. I appreciate seeing it for West Hill, but I'm also an Ottery, but also there's all the other ones. And so I just want to make sure that as a committee, you know, not just I'm happy, but everybody's happy, because it is a really important bit of the plan. And I don't know how we do that.
So, Mr. Freeman, can you remind me which chapter the green wedges are in?
Off the top of my head, and I stand to be corrected by Mr. Dickens, I think they're in the spatial strategy.
Mr. Dickens, any ideas? My suggestion will be that when we get to that chapter, we go through each of the green wedges, if that's of concern. It's policy OL05, which is chapter 12, our outstanding landscape. So my suggestion would be we can go through those when we get to that chapter, if that's okay with you and committee. I hear
But
no
yeah, that
objections,
would
so
be-
if...
And I don't know, Councillor Olive, whether there's other policies that need to be looked at on that kind of, not just within the settlements, but other policies that are pan-district, if that's the correct, rather than specifically to settlements.
So we'll adopt the same approach as we go through and identify anything that we need to look at. We'll do that. So thank you for highlighting that issue, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Ledger, you were waving your hand around a minute ago.
It's just to ask, do we have to declare interest on specific sites today, or is it high enough level that we don't have to?
Yes, please.
Yes, we've already discussed the sites previously, so it's just more high-end looking at the report itself. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hunter. And can we perhaps advise you to put the brakes on your table so you don't go flying? We wouldn't want health and safety paying us a visit. That brake's not on.
These are the things
Down
that
there.
they set up for me. I don't know.
That one's still not on, Damien. You need to push it more. Right, we'll come to chapter 1 while Damien sorts his table breaks out. The introduction to the plan. Does anybody have anything to say about the introduction? My only observation is that the map needs updating to say National Landscapes rather than AONB. And also, I just wanted to check, Mr. Freeman, point 1.4 says we'll add plan policies, whether they apply to Cranbrook or not, but that's not yet been done. Does that need to be reflected in the delegated authority in recommendation 1? Because it's not already.
Through you, Chair, I took that as being part of the tidying up and refining the local plan text that's referred to in recommendation 1. But if members want to make specific reference to that, happy for that to be included.
Mr. Hunter, are you satisfied that the delegated authority is broad enough to cover that point? Okay, fine. I had nothing else to say about chapter 1 then. Any other members? No? Okay, we come then to chapter 2, the vision. Members, any comments? I think we've discussed this in some detail previously, but you never know. No? Okay, then chapter 3, the spatial strategy. Members. Councillor Bailey, Jess Bailey.
Can we go to, I'm looking at, I think it's in chapter 3, it's tricky, isn't it? Page 25, and is this the right time to talk about the numbers in the chart?
If it's in chapter 3.
I think it's in chapter 3.
It looks to be in chapter 3 to me.
Yes, okay, good. So looking at the West Hill numbers, the total housing requirement is 70, but I don't think that that's correct. So when we're saying all known, it's defined as all known supply sources, completions, commitments, and DPD allocations. So we know there's allocated one site for 30, one's at planning, and 34 has been rejected, and there's no other allocations. So I think that should be less than 60 and certainly not 70.
Through Chair, all I can do is take that away and check,
Thank
because
you.
I don't know off the top of my head exactly how that number's been made up, but we can certainly check
Thank you.
on that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bailey. And apologies to members outside of committee, I forgot to come to you first. Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I wasn't exactly sure if this is where I was supposed to be putting in the comment anyway, because one of my questions or subjects was the site. It relates to Ottery 20 on the edge of Fenetton. I did well, in my own mind anyway, question there was a comment earlier on in the process suggesting that Fenetton is larger than West Hill. I don't know where that came from, because it's quite clear it isn't. And it was suggested at the parish's own public meeting that they seem to have taken the house numbers for Fenetton from the whole ward. That would be Fenetton, Buckroll and Gittisham, to get the high numbers, because they do leaflet drops around the parish, and they're suggesting that their parish total is under 800 houses, and yet we've given a figure of something 1,200 or something, which is partly why, I think, isn't that why we've been giving out so many houses to Fenetton, because it's suggested to be a larger community than it actually is. And this is where I mean, we've got no number for Ottery 20. I recognise that, but it's the fact that that site is going to push that number. They've already got something like 130, I think, 129 or something. So if we develop out Ottery 20, it's going to be enormous increase. It's far bigger than the rest of the community, and you seem to have got a number of houses for Fenetton, which is incorrect, I think.
So I'm not sure where that number appears in the plan, if at all, but we can leave that with Mr. Freeman to check and make sure that any numbers are correct with regard to the total number of houses at Fennerton. Insofar as the point on the allocation, the decisions have been made on the allocation, so we're not, I don't think constitutionally, other than the ones where circumstances have changed and officers have brought a different recommendation, I don't think we can revisit those individual decisions constitutionally, even if we wanted to. And even if we could, that would be Chapter 5, not Chapter 3. So thank you for the point about the numbers at Fennerton. Mr. Freeman will check those, but otherwise we'll move on. I'm not sure who was first, so I'm going to go with Councillor Ingham.
Sorry, this is questions.
As you like, whatever points you've got to make. We're not coming to the recommendations until the end of the day. We're just going through the chapters.
In that, if you look at our vision 1.4, yeah, on page 94, and what that says about a second new town, yeah, that's quite different from when we just get into chapter 3, SP01, item B. So in a vision written by the members, do you remember we did that? The members did that. They said a second new town is of primary importance, as it says in 1.4. But we get to SP01, not written by councillors. It says promoting the most significant development levels at the principal centre of Exmouth. Yeah, so you know already, having created a vision, which we did first of all, SP1 doesn't follow that vision. That's my interpretation.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd point out SPO1 has the west end of the district as the highest tier and refers to including a further new town as A. And then what we've done, subsequent to previous discussions, we've created a separate level for Exmouth as the principal centre, which I think was feedback from a previous meeting, was that Exmouth had previously been included in with the main centres of Axminster, Honiton, Ottery, St Mary, Seaton and Sidmouth, and members asked for Exmouth to have its own level within that policy. So that's what we've done, but it still sits below the West End and the new town.
Is the issue perhaps that should say the most significant development levels in existing settlements? Is that the point you're picking up on there, Councillor Ingham?
I want to know what officers are saying. It doesn't.
Microphone.
Your interpretation of the wording is right. You know, one contradicts the other. What is it you mean?
I don't see it as contradictory. I think what we're saying is we're focusing new development at the west end of the district, and then it goes on to expand that includes the new town, ongoing development at Cranbrook and other strategic developments close to Exeter. And then we're saying promoting the most significant development levels at the principal centre of Exmouth. As the chair says, if members feel that that's, I think we're referring to the most significant development at existing settlements, as the chair says, we could amend the wording to make that clearer, but that's what we mean. Yes, which I understood to be in accordance with members' wishes.
I think maybe we'll take that suggested change in wording away and action that just to clarify that it's at existing settlements. Councillor Young.
In 1.6 on page 94, it's written modest sensitivity plan development, or do you mean it's sensitivity plan development that will be modest? Quite a difference in description.
I see we're back in chapter 2.
I do apologise, but I'm going by page numbers.
Okay. It's page 15 of Appendix 1, rather than of the whole pack. Point 1.6 in chapter 2. So what do you think that sentence should say, Jeff?
I think what you mean, no, it is sensitively planned development. So I would suggest that sensitively planned development, that will be modest. But modest sensitivity, I think we've got it.
I think we might be splitting hairs here slightly,
Yes,
Councillor Young.
but
Mr. Freeman can make a note of that point, and we'll clarify the wording afterwards. That's fine.
Yeah.
If there are any other, and with respect, Councillor Young, minor issues with wording, please write them down and email them, and we'll pick them up after, rather than needing to spend time today talking about them. Councillor Young. Was it? Okay. Coming back to chapter 3 then, any further comments on the spatial strategy chapter? That's chapter 3, Jeff. And you have a different set of page numbers to me, so I can't help you. Okay, we come then to chapter 4, when I get to it in a moment, which is development at the West End. Members' comments. Councillor Ingham.
I want to take you back to what Councillor Rylance was saying. It's quite interesting. I think she was accurate in what she tried to capture in people's aspirations in East Devon, and what we should try and do. My concern is that we're being led to adopt certain strategies, policies that are misguided, because Councillor Rylance pointed out the importance of supporting new and affordable homes for next generations, which I believe she's absolutely right in saying, especially in our second new town, in very close proximity to 5 different work hubs, I'll call them. I hate that expression, but you know what I mean. Whereas we've been told recently that statistics say that we don't want these small homes specifically for, or they aren't of primary importance. We want bigger homes, and that's what the statistics are telling us. I believe that's a misinterpretation of the statistics. I think Councillor Rylance is right, and that our primary aim should be to deliver as close as we possibly can to affordable homes, and as many of them as possible, so we can improve the well-being and working status for future generations in East Devon, and we're all dead and gone. Even you, Todd, even when you've gone as well. It's very important for us to do that. So I'm just warning you that we have to be very careful about how we move forward. And Councillor Rylance mentioned about, perhaps encouraging the wrong type of development, wrong type of developers. It's very difficult to control that. But what we can do is in our policies, be very careful that we're not swayed by misinterpretation of statistical evidence, because we assume that once that assumption's made, it's correct. And I'm not sure it is. So I thank Councillor Rylance for bringing that issue up.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ingham. I have Councillors Young, then Ledger, then Fernley. No, not Councillor Young, Councillor Ledger.
Thanks, Chair. Just under Strategic Policy WS01, it talks about 35% affordable housing. My question is, within the Cranbrook plan, we've actually split that out to say the actual percentages of types of affordables. and it's whether the committee, it's just a discussion point, whether we want to actually list our aspirations now in that, to that level of detail, or are we happy and content with 35%? I know that with even self-builds as well, I think it's 6% in Cranbrook or 4%, one of the two. So there's that question. And then with regards to densities, we've said about high intensity within the town centre, site averages around 45. Do we want to list on the peripheries of the new town to it be less so even then? So as we get out from the centre, it becomes less and less dense, so that we're building how our aspirations are, or are we content with just saying it's dense in the centre, everywhere else is 45, and then that can go all the way to the edge of the new settlement? It's just those 2 points, Chair.
Through you, Chair. So in terms of the affordable housing, the mix of tenure types is set out in policies in the housing chapter of the plan. What we sought to do with the policy on the new community is keep the scope of that policy to things that are specific to the new town, and where there are policies that are district-wide in terms of, for example, the mix of affordable housing, which we will want not just at the new community, but on all sites in the district, the policy within the housing chapter will apply universally, because the plan has to be read as a whole. So that's why it's not specifically stated in the policy for the new town, but the policy will come onto there and the housing chapter will apply there as it will everywhere else. In terms of mix of affordable housing, in terms of densities, there's a balance here between setting principles, which is what we're doing in terms of an allocation, and what will come through the master plan, which will need to set out more specific areas in terms of density and how those densities actually manifest themselves on the ground, which will be another level of detail, and then the planning applications themselves, which will obviously set that. So the way I saw it is in the policy, we're setting the sort of principle of site-wide densities, higher densities at key locations like the town centre, neighbourhood centres, key destinations and transport hubs. Naturally, the density would tail off towards the edges of the site, but equally at this stage, I think until we've done the master planning, we don't know which edges where you'll have things like Sangs, for example, where you'll naturally be tailing off into a rural area, or where potentially there might be further phases of development where it might not be quite so important for the densities to tail off, and that needs to come through the master planning process. So I think that's a level of detail we don't need to put in the policy at this stage, that will come forward through the master plan as work progresses. And then we need obviously to link the master plan back to this policy ultimately, so that there's that tie-in, and that master plan has status to then control what's coming through the applications. But it's part of the complexities of this kind of two-stage process, because we don't have the master plan yet.
Councillor Fernley, then Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome that we are considering employment and have allocations, reasonable sizes for allocations in the West End, because we have got reasonably good roads, communication, green travel. We want to have the working places close to where people are living, and we've got this rush of young people and new families in Tithe Barn, Cranbrook. So it's vitally important that we've got really good jobs for them. I feel a bit uncomfortable about sort of signing off plans where we haven't got numbers in. So FP04, the sites allocated in this plan, not at new communities, and it says XXX hectares, and further down there's XXX, and the total is XXX. I just feel a bit uncomfortable that we have to vote on this when we haven't actually got the figures in there.
Through you, Chair, obviously the site's built 2020 to 2024 is a fact. So we obviously need to populate that, but it's not something that's going to change. It's a statement of fact. In terms of site allocated in this plan, I think that's just a case of totting up the totals elsewhere. So there's nothing that's actually changed. It's just tossing up the totals of the sites that are allocated in the plan. I'm not actually sure why that's not been populated, thinking about it, because we obviously do know the total. With some simple maths, I could populate that. So apologies, that's not populated, but it will obviously be the sum of all the employment sites allocated in the plan that are listed elsewhere.
Okay, I'm going to come, because again, I forgot to go outside committee first, to Councillor Roy Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Exeter Airport. A few meetings back, Derek Gent was here speaking about Exeter Airport, saying about the runway is far too short, that modern planes can't land there, and it was fuel inefficient and all the rest of it. Well, some years ago, I was talking to Derek Pyle. He used to own Teesbeer Farm, and he told me back then that part of the farm was needed to build a new runway for Exeter Airport. Is there any provision in these plans to protect land so that a new runway could be built for Exeter Airport? Thank you.
No. That's a nice, easy question. There isn't any provision to protect land for a new runway.
Well, should you not be making provision?
I'm going to come to Mr. Freeman on that one. Should we be making provision for do you mean a second runway or a replacement runway?
Well, probably a replacement or extension. I don't know Exeter Airport, to be honest.
Mr. Freeman, do we need to make provision for an extension to the runway at Exeter Airport?
I'm not aware of any need to do so, and I'm not aware that we've had any correspondence from the airport requesting that we do anything like that. I'm looking to Mr. Dickens in case he knows of any different. So I'm not aware that we've been given any information to suggest that there's a need to do that, or that we should be doing that through this plan. So it's no, it hasn't been part of our thinking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Young.
Just on the point of the airport, I understood that the runway was sufficient for the requirements by civil aviation. There was a second runway which hasn't been used since the Second World War. Regarding Chapter 4, I think we're on. I still find it awkward that we are not defining the West End. It's still too woolly, and developers keep saying to me, but so-and-so is in the West End, and I point out, no, it's not. And they say, well, where's the map? So I would, we've got maps of pretty well everything, but for such a key location as the West End, we haven't got a map. I find that rather strange.
So, Mr. Freeman, we had asked for one, and there is commentary about this in the covering report. Do you want to talk us through officers' thinking about why you've rebelled against committee in this instance?
I wasn't deliberately rebelling, Chair. I think it was, my recollection was there was call for sort of clarity about what we were referring to as the West End. We've kind of sought to do that through text rather than a plan, because I think it's quite challenging to draw a line on a plan to actually define. Well, perhaps I should get you a pen and paper, and perhaps you could do that for us, Councillor Young, because it's I don't think it's a straight boundary as to be able to say, oh, right, on that field boundary, that's the West End, that side, it's not the West End, the other. It's a more fluid boundary than that, a bit more of a woolly boundary than that. If members feel that that's important, then we could have a go at doing that, but I think we've struggled to do that. I think it's I think it's reasonably clear in the text where we're referring to, and there are specific sites that we've identified as being within the West End, which helps to define what we mean by the West End. I don't think the existing local plan actually puts a line on a map in terms of that. And I think the phrase kind of originates from the structure plan, if I recall, which didn't either. So it's never been defined in terms of a line on a map, and I question the need to do so if we're clear that we're talking about an approximate area and specific sites that constitute that area in the plan. But over to members if you feel differently.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I get the distinct impression we have encountered a rabbit hole on this particular issue, so let us go down it with aplomb. Councillor Brian Bailey.
A long time since I've been able to fit in a rabbit hole, Chair, but I look forward to the day. Thank you. I would suggest that the natural boundary for the West End would be anything to the west of the boundary of the Pebblebed Heaths, which would be Woodbury, Lympstone, Exton, Exmouth and Budleigh Salterton, which are all on the map below the Pebblebed Heath. So there's your boundary, if I may be so bold to suggest that. I don't know what you would think about that, Chair. Thank you.
Isn't Budleigh Salterton to the east of the western end of the Pebblebed Heaths? Either way. Okay, we come on to Councillor Fernley. You have already spoken on this chapter, so I'm going to give you a stern glaze and tell you to be quick, please.
Well, now my understanding of the West End is completely different to what I thought it was before, seeing as I thought I lived in it. I would have thought you could have, I mean, it doesn't have to have a boundary as in like a carefully drawn line. Can it just not have a shaded sort of area? Shaded area has to end somewhere. Well, true, it doesn't have to have a hard edge.
I would question what the point of a shaded area that doesn't have a hard edge in planning policy is. Councillor Ingham, did you want to dig us further into this hole?
No, I don't. I think it's a bad idea. I'm with Mr. Freeman on this one. So, but what I did want to do is come back on what Councillor Ledger was saying with affordable housing. It's so important, I believe, we do as much as possible rather than tiptoe through grey areas. Let's face it, that if we set a target, and you won't like this, but to consider, if we set a target of 70% mixed tenure, right, that would mean we would hit our affordable housing needs a lot earlier. So in actual fact, you could then argue, well, we don't need to supply, say, 1,000 houses. We can reduce that by 20%, because what we actually need, the affordable houses, are being built. And the problem is, if we don't set high targets for affordable housing and go up instead of out, you know, in area or footprint, if we fail to do that, at some stage we're going to run out of the West End, wherever that land is, you know, wherever you draw that boundary, because we'll have built too many of the houses we don't actually need, but government want. And that will then mean you're forced into building in the, you know, what were the AONBs, and I can't remember what it is, National Landscapes, that's it. You'll be forced to do that because you'll have exhausted your land supply with the wrong houses. And we'll have more of what we've got, which is an ageing demographic and not young people working in the area, providing enough in taxes to accommodate those who have retired. I think what Councillor Ledger has suggested is really important, and we're not doing enough.
Okay, so I'm sensing there is going to be a discussion about that affordable housing policy when we get to that in, where is it? HN02. I've lost HN02 in chapter 8. So maybe we can visit that when we get to the affordable housing section. Does anybody have any further comments specifically on things that are in chapter 4? Councillor Ledger.
just coming back to really responding on the feedback from Ed Freeman, and it's just asking a question of knowing the demographic that we've already got within our new settlement of Cranbrook. Do we want to make changes to, for instance, the affordable housing makeup, so that we're repeating the same kind of demographic within Cranbrook? We are looking at 35% affordable. Are we looking to increase the amount of social housing in that? It's the social housing mix within that, I think, is really key, and it's just whether we define that as separate to the rest of the district. It's a question more than anything.
Do we want to define separate requirements for the new settlement? Mr. Freeman.
Well, through Chair, I think Councillor Ledger's right. If we're going for a different requirement in terms of tenure mix, we would need to state it in the policy for the new town. But I think we have to work on the evidence that we have fundamentally, which is about the district-wide housing needs and local housing needs assessments that give us the need for district-wide. It's not specific to the new town location, which we would need to justify going for something different there. And also there's the viability issues and the viability evidence you've heard at previous meetings that suggests that has modelled out the percentage of affordable housing, the impacts of different tenure mix, which is how we've arrived at the mix that's currently in the policies. So there's limited scope from the evidence we've got, I think, to deviate from that. The other thing I'd say in terms of the new community is, to some extent, there's also this issue about the delivery vehicle and how the new community is delivered, because those viability calculations are obviously based on a traditional delivery model, whereas if we were delivering the new community through a different delivery model, whereby, I don't know, if a locally led development corporation or something was set up and we were in a position where we were given powers by government to acquire land at a zero scheme value or something, then the viability model would completely alter. And there may be scope to deliver higher levels of affordable housing. But we don't know whether or not that will be the case at this point in time. So there's an element of uncertainty in some of these things with the new community because of the delivery model, the master plan and things like that might potentially need to be revisited.
So I've, and I suspect this might be the point that Councillor Ledger is about to make. Policy HN02, which for members is in Chapter 8 of Appendix 1, has a separate line for the affordable housing percentage and breakdown in the new community, which it says is still to be determined through viability work, the master planning exercise, etc., which will come to the second Regulation 19 consultation. So I think Councillor Ledger's point here that actually we may well have different requirements. Actually, the policy in Chapter 4, WSO1, maybe needs to be amended to say XX percentage because it's still to be determined.
Yes, I take your point, Chair. There is a contradiction there. So yeah, I mean, certainly we could change that to an XX and say it's to be determined, and then consult on that through the second phase, the Reg 19 consultation, based on any further information we have at that time, if members are more comfortable with that.
I think that possibly makes sense from the discussion. Good spot, Councillor Ledger, thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Thank you, Chair. Two very small points. Just referring to what Councillor Ledger has talked about with regard to provision of affordable houses. One of the great successes of Cranbrook, and dare I say this in the face of what Councillor Rylands referred to as ghettoisation of the younger families. One of the great successes has been the creation of dwellings that younger people have been able to afford to buy, and admittedly a lot of that was backed up by the previous government's assistance schemes, but that has enabled an awful lot of people to buy into properties they could not have otherwise had a hope of doing.
And so that type of approach, I think, would be appropriate for the new town, assuming that the governance model enables us to do it. I'm sure we'll make sure that it does. And the only other thing I was going to suggest, as far as the West End is concerned, surely it's anything west of the boundaries with the national landscapes. You hardly need to define it beyond that. Controversial, perhaps. Discuss.
The West End grows by the day, or by the minute in this case. Okay, thank you, Councillor Blakey. I hear no specific suggestions for amendments there, so I'm going to move swiftly on to Councillor... I know, Councillor Brian Bailey.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm considering listening carefully to what everybody's saying, and people keep saying affordable housing. Unfortunately, it's not happening. We're not getting the amount of affordable houses in the area of East Devon that we actually need. And I would like to suggest that we do for more social rent and social housing for rent, because young people are in a situation.
So
I can only
with apologies, Brian, I'm going to stop you there because affordable housing is in a different chapter. So if it's okay with you, can we come back to that issue, please?
Certainly, I apologise for being ahead of the curve.
That's all right. Don't worry,
It's unusual
Brian.
for me to be ahead of the curve.
It's all right.
Thank you very much.
We'd rather people were ahead of the curve than behind it, certainly. Okay, are there any further comments from members about Chapter 4 before we come back to the proposed amendments to Policy WSO1 that Mr. Freeman mentioned earlier? Yes. Councillor Howe.
I thought I'd start my day. This is a tough one, and it's one of those where I just think we need to talk about it. It's SP07.
That's not
chapter before, was it? Which chapter have I gone to then? I'm losing it as well.
Yeah, that's Chapter 3.
Chapter
That's
3.
fine. We'll do
Okay.
SP07 then.
Okay.
Yeah, you're behind the
Yeah, well, it's all over the place. It's the reality, and looking at Cranbrook as a classic example of how are we going to engage these infrastructure providers in a more timely manner to bring forward the other infrastructure that we need. Now, I'm not looking at schools, which are delivered superbly in Cranbrook generally, and other bits and pieces were delivered. I'm more thinking of health service and other bits and pieces which are left floundering. And I know it's not our remit. We collect the money, we offer it to the NHS, and the NHS doesn't seem to want to spend it in the best will of the world. But I am struggling to see how we can engage to make sure we don't make the same mistake a second time and actually compound the already mistake that's being made with Cranbrook about that. So I'm just trying to look for some warm words somewhere, I think.
Mr. Freeman, I think this comes back to the delivery vehicle by which we take the new community forward, doesn't it?
Yes, I think it does in terms of the new community and us, or the public sector trying to gain control of land at the earliest possible opportunity to enable the delivery of infrastructure such as healthcare facilities. The other kind of words of comfort I would say is I think all parties have learned a lot of lessons from Cranbrook, particularly the NHS in terms of healthcare provision, and we've now got much better working relationships with the relevant parties, the local NHS, the ICB, to work through those issues and a much greater understanding of what is needed when in terms of the delivery of a new community to learn those lessons in terms of the second new town and hopefully ensure that there is adequate healthcare provision at the appropriate stages as the town grows and is built out. So I think we're in a much better position than we were. Only time will tell as to whether or not the money is there to actually deliver the infrastructure in phase with the housing, which will to a large extent depend on the support from government in terms of infrastructure funding.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Young, quickly, please.
Yeah, just quickly on the National Health Service. It seems that we are reliant on the National Health Service to come to us when a planning application comes through. But we're now talking about a local plan, and they don't seem to have responded too well to our local plan. We haven't had much input from them, I believe. So it would be nice to get them to understand where we're going with the local plan and get them on board, because on some sites that are coming forward, they say, oh yes, we want this for our services, and on other sites, they're totally absent on what they are wanting.
So I really don't want to end up going any further down this rabbit hole because it's beyond the issue that Mike's raised. It's not really chapter 4, but Mr. Freeman, have the NHS been engaged in this process? I know the answer, but for the record.
Well, in fairness, they have been engaged much more than in previous plans. They have commented, and we have been sending them the projections in terms of new homes in different locations since the allocations, so that they can model the impact on healthcare facilities and advise us, which would then inform our infrastructure delivery plan, which we're working alongside this. So I'm pleased to say there's much more engagement than previously, and a much better understanding of the impact on healthcare services and what needs to be done to deliver what will be needed. I think the key thing now is going to be whether or not the funding is there to actually deliver.
So that's good news.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. So coming back then to the proposed change to policy WS01, if we could perhaps get that on screen. HDMI 2, please. Thank you very much. So this is just, if I'm right, Mr. Freeman, a proposed addition to policy WS01. Is that right?
That's correct. So I would see this additional wording being inserted. I think it's after the section that refers to infrastructure, which is towards the end of the policy.
Okay, could we take the, yeah, there we go. Could we just take the video feed off the screen so members can have a moment to look through that? No, that's making me big. Wrong way. Just get rid of me for a minute, please.
In fairness, there isn't any text under there. It's just the word proposed is slightly obscured.
Okay, Councillor Young, comments on this proposed addition?
From the experience of Cranbrook, we've learnt our lesson, and this seems to be a really good step moving forward with the new town. Thank you.
Yeah, the stewardship statement, I think, is well worded. The business of public spaces and community assets to be owned, managed and maintained, so on, it is fine. I think perhaps it doesn't really go far enough, though, because for me, the new town really has to be almost entirely controlled by whatever this body is going to be called, which is going to include all the land for development, particularly, well, certainly the commercial development, perhaps also some land for residential development, because without that, if we hand the entirety of the development land to the developers as normal, I'm not sure that we're very much further forward with it. So what you have there is, if you look at the Cranbrook setup currently, stewardship of community assets, public open spaces and so on, that's really fallen into the hands of the town council. What we're looking here is something which would be pretty much the same. But in terms of the development of a new town, I think that this authority needs to exercise a lot more control over what is built and when than was the case with Cranbrook. And actually, the way you do that is by way of ownership. But I think that's where it's got to go. So I would like to see a stronger and more ambitious wording used to say that this authority has to take a firm grip over the majority of what is going to be developed in the new town.
Through you, Chair, I mean, I think the scope of this is quite limited, as you say, in terms of the stewardship and management of assets within the town. I think there's a slightly separate issue around a sort of delivery vehicle for the town itself and how that comes forward, which this doesn't seek to address. And I think there's a challenge there in terms of the role of planning in terms of that. Because a lot of that, in terms of whether we establish ownership within the town, whether we establish some kind of locally led development corporation or other vehicle, is kind of outside of the planning process and outside of the remit of the local plan, and comes down to us making an ask of government fundamentally in terms of how that's moved forward, and then in response, hopefully giving us powers to do those sorts of things. But they're not necessarily things we can tie down in terms of planning policy. As I see it, that's a slightly separate issue. But yes, we do need to take measures to do that, and indeed we are. I believe the intention is to put forward an expression of interest for the New Towns programme, for example, which would be one avenue of doing that, but it's not the only one. You know, there are opportunities to approach Homes England about alternative delivery vehicles that may give us powers to do a lot of those things as well. But I don't think we can set that out necessarily in planning policy. It's more outside of the planning process that those things would take place.
Just to reassure you, Councillor Blakey, we are absolutely doing them 100%, even if they don't or can't, as Mr. Freeman says, appear in here. We are on it, I promise. Councillor Jess Bailey, then Councillor Howe, then Councillor Ingham.
I'm not 100% sure if this is the point that Councillor Blakey was making. I think it possibly was, but I do think that Limb B is too restrictive by just referring to public spaces and community assets, because actually the life of a new town goes way beyond that. Is that the point that Councillor Blakey was making? Because obviously there's commercial spaces, it's quite narrow to talk about public spaces and community assets.
I think to my mind, community assets can be quite a lot of things, can't they? Depends how you view it.
I mean, things like town centres, you know, I'm not sure that that is community assets or public spaces necessarily.
Mr. Freeman, what do you think? Does that wording need to be broader to cover off Jess's point?
I think it's a balancing act between how precise you are and then end up excluding things by being precise that we might subsequently want to include in that, and being quite broad to leave it open to include things. But to my mind, community assets could certainly include you know, town centre spaces, employment spaces that are part of a community endowment scheme that's helping to fund the maintenance and management of community assets. I think it's sort of deliberately broad to take that in. Is again part of the challenge with the new community, is trying to address all of these issues that might arise in the future without snookering ourselves, as it were, in terms of what might come in the future as well. So, I mean, happy to look at the wording if members feel it needs to be more precise, but there are dangers of being too precise as well.
No, I'm thinking it needs to be less precise, because I think community assets is actually quite narrow. Because I would look at that and say, oh, well, that means community assets, like community assets, assets of community value, quite a restrictive So I'm thinking it should be more general so that it's wider than just specific community assets.
I think it would be fair to say that's the intention, isn't it, Mr. Freeman? So we can take that away and come up with a wider wording, if that's the view of committee. I then had Councillor Howe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just me having a really bad day, but I'm sat here reading this and I keep reading it and I go over it several times. And to me, I'm sitting and looking at Councillor Blakey and thinking the stress and strain that Cranbrook Town Council went through when they tried to remove the estate charges. And that's where I'm looking and reading this, is more about management companies and estate charges and what, because they effectively pay for the open spaces and everything else. And nowhere in these statements do I see our ambition to make sure it remains in public ownership, i.e. ideally the lowest tier, the new town council that will be formed or whatever else, should be the ideal route when it's built to be managed. And we don't want to fall into this trap anywhere of a management company getting in there somehow throughout whichever way, and then having the pain and frustration we all know happens of then unpicking that. And I would just like to see a bit more ambition of stating what the end vehicle is. And to me, it should be the lower tier of government, which is town council in this case, as it will be.
I think, whispering to Mr. Freeman, our hesitation is probably that it wouldn't necessarily be for a planning policy to stipulate that, and that it would be better elsewhere, Mr. Freeman?
Yes, my nervousness about being too prescriptive is technically from a planning perspective. We need to be assured that these spaces are appropriately managed and maintained fundamentally. I don't know that it's necessarily appropriate from a planning perspective to be overly prescriptive about how that happens. I appreciate we want it to be in public ownership and see that as the best model, but there are other models that could achieve the planning requirements, but not necessarily the wider community requirements that we might want to place on this. So I think this is why it's not prescriptive about a particular model. It's about getting agreement at an early stage and having that model in place from an early stage, so that we don't run into the issues we've had at Cranbrook, where that model's changed during the build-out process. I think what we could do is put something in the explanatory text that states a sort of aspiration about what we would like to see that model to be. But I think exactly what that model is and how that comes forward, again, comes back to delivery vehicles and how this space is being delivered, and the governance arrangements that are in place to facilitate that.
Councillor Howe has just whispered to me that that's what he wants. So does anybody have any further points about that specific issue? I know we have other speakers on this point. Councillor Blakey, I'll come back to you.
One-liner. The question that isn't posed there but needs to be answered is, how is it going to be funded? In other words, by whom?
Definitely needs answering, definitely not for this document, but point well made, Councillor Blakey. So coming back to my list then, I believe I had Councillors Ingham and then Young.
I think there's a risk, Chair, if we're not careful, is before you've got married, you're trying to work out who's going to do the washing up and the sewing, and the darning. Let's not go there, because the problem is, I think this is a great aspiration. Funny that you said the words aspiration as well, because I do believe you've got a choice, haven't you? You may want to, at the outset, to say, we will govern this rigidly, based on how we were treated at Cranbrook. I would understand that. But I would say the most, probably, it's not definite, but the most successful long-term outcome for a second community would be through a joint venture between East Devon District Council and whoever the developers are. And if you go in, and the reason why I said that opening statement is, if you believe a joint venture is correct, then being too prescriptive or restrictive at this stage is foolish, because what you want to do is get the buy-in of your partner and to say, well, we thought about these ideas, how do you see this? And so I think Mr. Freeman is right, especially when he said, perhaps we have to capture what we aspire to do. And that was the word I was thinking. You can put in there, we aspire to, and you put your outcomes. And like Mr. Freeman said, that may be through the public sector, it may be through the private, whichever doesn't matter, potentially, because we don't know the climate in 20 years' time. What we do know is what our communities aspire for us to achieve on their behalf. So I'm minded at the moment to say, Mr. Freeman's attitude is right, but he might to put down, as he said, aspirations of what those outcomes are for this new community. Because otherwise we'll get trapped, as I think one of you said, you know, in 5 years' time, like we've been at Cranbrook, through over-prescribing what would happen. We want this amount of money, 10 years later, it delivers nothing because it's not enough. Do you see? We have to be fairly fluid so that we can deliver the right outcomes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. So I want to take us away from talking about what the delivery vehicle is going to look like, because that's a discussion, I promise, very much for another day that we will be having down the line when that business case comes forward from the consultants for us to consider. Are there any further comments on the wording of this proposed addition to the policy? Councillor Young?
Yeah, I would just say that this is a planning, for the planning document, and the governance further on of how we manage the town is something totally different. So that is specific enough for a planning document, but with the addition of what Ed has suggested, with a bit more explanation of why we're doing it. So the inspector will say, oh, I see what we're doing. That makes good sense.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Young. So I'm going to move us on from this one then, as I think we've explored that one. I'm conscious that actually, and I'm going to be guilty of it now as well, we missed out the proposed additional policy to go into chapter 3. So we're gonna. I'm sorry, but we're gonna just quickly go back to this one on phased developments. Hopefully fairly uncontroversial. But does anybody have any comments about this policy, which is a proposed addition to chapter 3? And once we've done this one, we're going to take a break if that's an incentive. Councillor Ingham.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure we can do anything about it, but please be aware, or in my opinion, on track record, the problem with doing this is that you concertina your land supply, and then, you know, what you propose to do until 2042 is all achieved by 2032. And then, surprise, surprise, we've got to do another local plan because we've already delivered or over-delivered, which we've done for most of this period, whereas every other council's failed, most of them have failed abysmally, you know. So just cautious about oversupplying, which we've done recently.
I think this is more about phasing development within an allocation rather than when developments happen on the timeline of the plan, but point taken there. Don't forget your microphone. Thank you, Ben. Any specific comments on the wording of this policy?
Yes, where we're talking about cycling and pedestrian, highways are always telling me off when I talk about a cycleway and they say multi-use, shared use, etc., etc. We need to be specific all the way through and have an agreement with highways how we're going to describe these I still call them cycleways. So somehow we need the same wording all the way, all through the whole document. Now we talk about cycleways. But are we talking about multi-use trails? Or what?
I think all that this is saying is that whatever form that access takes, whether it's just pedestrian access with separate cycle access, or whether it's multi-use, that's a matter for the planning application. This is just saying that access needs to be to the boundary.
Maybe we just need a description somewhere in the appendix saying, no, cycleways means, and then put in what highways want us to put in.
Does it really matter? I'm a bit fed up of highways telling us what we can and can't do and say, to be honest. And I'm sure that it's not just me. But maybe we can take that away and reflect on it rather than dig another hole. Councillor Ledger, then Councillor Jess Bailey.
My question really is the policy as written, will it deliver the outcomes that we're seeking? Because if you read it, such developments shall also ensure that all services, including electric, broadband, and all of that, are also delivered up to the boundaries of each phase or parcel. Now, a developer could turn around and say, "Oh, I want to phase this into this site into 4 phases. I'm only going to do 3 phases now," and then you then get into the whole rigmarole of ransom strips again, because if you've got 2 adjoining developers and one of them only builds out to phase 3, yes, they've built out to the boundary of phase 3, but they haven't unlocked the next developer. And by the wording currently, there is no mitigation for that.
I'm not sure I understand. If they all build up to the boundary, then the adjoining developer can pick up the services and the pedestrian, cycling and vehicular accesses from the boundary into their site.
Oh, I see. So if there are phases within a developer's parcel, and they do phases 1 to 3, but phase 4 is the one that borders the other development, or the other developer's parcel within.
Sorry, Chair, I know it's nitpicky, but it's something that I can guarantee you a developer would use.
No, you're absolutely right.
happily.
Yeah. Do you understand what he's saying?
Just thinking a way around it.
Is that one we can take away? Because the intent is clearly there. We'll take that one away. Thank you, Dan. Councillor Jess Bailey, then Councillor Howe.
Thank you. So there's quite a lot of text on the screen, and I just think it's a bit woolly. So what I would like to see is developers being required, you know, the policy should say developers must do X, Y, and Z, and produce a master plan, allocate responsibilities, comply with those responsibilities. That's just like a load of text that, you know, how are we going to hold developers to make sure they deliver phased delivery and infrastructure and services? I just can't see that that's going to be able to deliver what we, you know, it just reads a bit like a kind of, oh, we hope that they're going to coordinate between them. No, we need to have a policy directing them to coordinate and evidence how they're going to be coordinating. So to me, that's just a bit woolly. Sorry, thank you.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. There's lots of, as far as I can see, each of the individual requirements in this policy all have a must or a shall ensure or an equivalent kind of imperative instruction. I don't, maybe I'm missing something. I don't see anything in there that says ought to or would be nice if they did.
But using that, how will you establish during the master planning process that actually the respective responsibilities are allocated to the different developers? Because presumably from the outset, you need to know that this person's doing this, this, and this, and this person's doing this and this, and you've got it all clearly set out in your master plan with your timescales and obligations, and that there's not just a kind of, to me, that just isn't I just don't see how you can hold the different developers to account using that wording.
Through you, Chair, I mean, I think we've done the best we can to word a policy to address the issue. I'm not saying it's absolutely bulletproof. Hopefully there would be a master plan and we can work those things through in cooperation with all of the different parties working together such that we don't need to rely on this policy because it is all resolved through a master plan and a phasing plan. But there will inevitably, I suspect, be some instances where developers are not working together in a kind of collegiate way on master plans and phasing plans. And so I think having a policy like this as a fallback, if that doesn't happen, puts us in a much stronger position than if we don't. And frankly, at the moment, we don't have a policy like this. So these things do happen. I'm struggling to see what else we can do to address the concern you raise, Councillor Boney.
I think part of it is just the way it's presented in like a really big, like, however many lines just of solid text. I like to see things really clearly, so then you can pick out and you can say, policy this, you have to do that, you're not doing it. Whereas that's like...
We can certainly break this down into component ABC parts, can't we?
Yes, we can certainly look at the formatting of the wording and a list of requirements rather than a block of text. I have to admit, the block of text gradually got bigger and bigger as it got redrafted and different people commented and different things got added in. So it's a fair challenge that we could certainly make the formatting make it easier to read.
Okay, we will take that point then. Councillor Howe, then Councillor Young, and then I want to take a break.
Well, mine's fairly simple and actually not that relevant, but at the same time, at present, this is new policy to all of us, so we're reading it for the first time. And not one of us understands the justification for the policy because it has been blocked from our view partly. So it would be nice to know the missing words, picking up on points earlier made in public, of what we're missing. And maybe that's something we need to pick up with technology in a little bit of time as well.
I'm sure we can't just hide the video, Wendy. I'm sure we've done it before. So with everybody now having had a chance to read that, Councillor Young, final comment.
Yeah, what we're looking for is joined up approach from the developers, that you don't have a cable just going to the end of the road and then another developer then has to then put another cable in to compensate for the lack of size of the cable at the end of the road. One of my big beefs is surface water drainage, with every site having to do their own SUD scheme. And I would like to see a more of a joint approach with that. So rather than have a pond here and a pond there, have one big pond. And that can be done in the master planning. It can be covered by that. And the other point is some of those providers cannot use 106 money. I'm thinking of South West Water. So maybe we need to change the wording a bit because some providers can use 106, some providers can't.
I think here the 106 is just about securing obligations to do stuff rather than money, isn't it, Mr. Freeman? So that issue wouldn't crop up.
Yes, that's right. That's why the wording is the developments shall also ensure that all services are delivered to, and I've lost it. But it refers to working with providers rather than us funding. The intention isn't that we'd be funding infrastructure for any of those, really. In terms of suds and drainage basins. It raises some challenges because unlike the others, I think that is something that can be dealt with phase by phase. You can deal with it just on phase. And I can't see developers wanting to have surface water from their development discharging onto adjoining phases and be stored and handled on adjoining phases. I think that's going beyond what we need to achieve under this policy, if I'm honest. And it's something that does happen, though, and certainly happened at Cranbrook with in the first phases there with a coordinated approach. But I'm not sure that we need to secure that approach necessarily. There's equal merit in each parcel, each site washing its own face, as it were, in terms of surface water, I think.
I did say I was going to draw this to a close. Councillor Fernley. Your microphone.
Is this a planning term or is it just gobbledygook? Virtually the last line, I can't read it all because we've got everything there, and it goes comprehensive movement network. What's a movement network? Second to last line.
A movement network would be a network of pedestrian, cycling and vehicular routes that enable movement through the space.
Is that
so yes, it is slightly jargony. I think we were just trying to use a different form of words than saying pedestrian, cycling and vehicular routes again. But I can look at that.
We can de-jargonify that. That's fine. Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Chair. Question on process. There's a couple of things that we've already said that we're going to take it away. When are we going to see that again before it goes out, or are we going to be able to review that? Are we even going to get notice of it before we go to Reg 19 consultation? Just a question on process.
So I believe, and Mr. Freeman will correct me if I'm wrong, that the answer there is it depends when the MPPF comes out. If we have time to bring the final version back in January before the Reg 19 consultation starts, then the intention is to do so. If we don't, then we'll go straight to Reg 19 consultation. Am I correct, Mr. Freeman?
Yes, so my hope was that you would give delegated powers to me in consultation with the chair and vice chair as appropriate to agree any tweaks and amendments that you agree today to go straight out to consultation if that's what we need to do to keep to the timetable. But if the new NPPF comes out and does give us more than a month to launch the Reg 19 consultation such that we can bring it back to a meeting in the new year, then happy to bring back a final version for final sign-off. But we just don't know what's going to happen if the NPPF does come out this week and we've only got a month to launch the consultation, then there won't be an opportunity to bring it back.
Completely fine with that, completely appreciate it. It's just the fact that the members here would need to see sight of that. I would just hope that once all the amendments are completed and you intend to go out to Reg 19, that is shared with the membership.
As in, notice that it's going to be happening, or here's the final plan, do you have any final comments? Because I think the problem with the latter would be, it could be a case of...
It's not going to be designed by committee. If we give delegation to the two of you, then we've got that. But it's just having sight of this is what officers have come up with.
What we could do, because my intention is we've obviously got the document in the Teams format, we need to track any changes that are made following this meeting. So if it gives members comfort before we launch the consultation, we could send around the track changes version so that members can see how it's evolved from your meeting today to the version that goes out to consultation, because it's that track changes version I'll be asking the chair to sign off on. The difficulty with that, I can't commit to being able to give you much time before the consultation goes live. It might only be a day or two before the consultation goes live, but we can certainly let you have a track changes version before it does go live.
I'm completely happy with that. It's just ensuring that what we're saying today is then included in that, in in that finalised version, and if there are any things that have been missed off, that we can flag that before it goes out. And I think everyone here would be in agreement with that. I
That's
understand
fine.
how
I
big
think
the
we can make
document
that
is.
commitment then. Rest assured, I will also be looking for that as part of that delegated authority thing, but point taken, I think. Was there someone else who wanted to say something before we finish? Councillor Howe?
No, wouldn't he?
No? You're sticking your finger in the air
No,
like
I
you
was-
normally
I
do
was
when you want to
looking-
speak. Okay, in that case, then we'll take a break for 10 minutes and come back at 12:15 to consider chapter 5 before lunch. Okay, thank you, members. Welcome back. We come now to chapter 5, which includes the allocations, I believe I'm right in saying. Just to remind members, the allocation decisions have been taken. We're not going to be revisiting those other than the two that officers have flagged legal concerns regarding. So we'll take those two first to get them out of the way. Mr. Freeman, could you bring up the slides, and we'll start with Budlow 1. Could you perhaps just give us a brief reminder what the issues were here and what you're asking us to consider, please, Mr. Freeman?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So members may recall when we were looking at the wash-up session in terms of sites, I think there was concern among the membership that Budleigh Salterton was taking a disproportionately low number of homes. And so it was, there was a resolution to allocate up to 50 homes on Budlow 1, focused in the northeastern corner of the site, with delegated authority to myself in conjunction with the chair to determine a boundary of that site. We've subsequently had discussions with the developers. This is what they've come up with as a means of doing that, which is, I think, 53 homes essentially across the three sort of portions of the site, 3 fields you can see on the screen. Our feeling is that this has a disproportionately high landscape impact for the number of dwellings that it achieves. This site is quite visible particularly from public footpath over the other side towards the coast and the golf course looking back across towards this part of the town. But we do understand that there is the only opportunity to access this site really is from Bedlands Lane up here. That does necessitate quite a long section of road to access the part of the site that I think members were most supportive of, which was this corner here. And therefore you would need some development along that route to help to pay for that road and to make it work in placemaking terms in terms of having dwellings fronting onto it. So it is challenging. But the conclusion we've reached as officers is that we feel that the impact on the national landscape and the green wedge in this location is not justified in terms of the housing numbers that it would deliver. And we have demonstrated that we can meet the housing numbers elsewhere, including the 10% buffer, without needing to allocate this site in a national landscape, particularly bearing in mind the special justification that would be needed given that it is in a national landscape. So the recommendation is that we do not proceed with an allocation of this site.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. And this goes to recommendation, which number is it? Number 4? Yes, recommendation 4 that's set out in the covering report. Okay, so we'll come to members then. I saw Councillor Jess Bailey, then Councillor Ingham.
I think I'm happy with, well, not happy, but accepting personally of what the officers say. I do have a query though on page 24, which is the chart. Why does it say Budleigh Salterton 182 houses?
Apologies, I haven't got the chart in front of me because I'm showing my screen. Is this in the neighbourhood designated area requirements
Total
policy?
housing requirement 182. It's on page.
Yeah, it is the chart.
Yeah, so that's taking into account consented schemes as well since 2020, isn't it? So that's across the full plan period.
So have there been?
There have been some infill developments within the town consented and built during that time, which is
Seems
bolstering
quite-
that numbers over and above the allocations.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ingham.
Chair, have I misremembered the size of the actual original allocation? Wasn't it bigger than what you're showing us? Well, didn't it include the 3 fields south of that?
The total site put forward, yes, included the 3 fields to the south,
Oh,
the one
right.
to the west,
So
and
they
the one
haven't
to the
totally
northwest.
ignored what we said. They have done what I thought we'd asked them to do. That implies that they've filled up the whole of the site, which is not accurate. Do you see what I mean? We've got to be fair to them. We said 50 houses. You couldn't put 50 houses in that easternmost field. Well, you wouldn't want to live in them if you did. Certainly no one from Budley would want to live in them. You know what they're like. So I don't think we should be unreasonable about what they've done. And if that's true, that was a bigger site and they've come back with this, I just think sometimes, you know, you've opened the bottle and you've poured it out and then you want to put it back in with the top on and say, well, we didn't want to pour this, you know, and you're taking the bottle back. I just think maybe we not misled them, but said you can do this. They've done that, or their interpretation of it, and maybe we're being. I just think there may be trouble down the line, because.
All I'd say, Chair, is that as officers, we were not recommending allocation of this site. I'm not saying they've taken an unreasonable interpretation of what was discussed at the meeting. I think my advice to the committee was that it was that northeasternmost field that was the most developable. But I take your point. I think you could get 50 in there, but it wouldn't reflect the density of Bedlands Lane. It would reflect more the density of the housing further to the north that you can see on the plan. But ultimately, I don't think it makes sense as an allocation, given what we've achieved in terms of housing numbers elsewhere and the sensitivity of this site. But they could pursue a planning application and it be considered on its merits. Equally, they can object to the plan and make their representations to the examination and argue that it should be included as an examination. So it's not entirely the end of the road in terms of the allocation if members do support the recommendation. But I don't think we need to or should be allocating this site given its sensitivities.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Councillor Young.
Yeah, so if we don't accept this site, then it then falls back into the green wedge as proposed on the map, which would, and also the built-up area boundary or whatever we're going to call it now. It's going to be excluded from that, so it would be very difficult for justification for a planning application to come through because it's green wedge, national landscape, and it's outside the built-up area boundary. So we're basically excluding this site for the period of the plan, by the sound of it. I find it very difficult to justify to the residents I represent that Budley is having such a small percentage of housing development compared with their villages, the ones that I represent. So I find it difficult to accept, but I can't see any other alternative.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I can't say I necessarily disagree with that sentiment. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. As a former resident of Budley Salterton, I lived in Budley Salterton the best part of 50 years. I'm now in Exmouth. Now, I can't see a problem with this. I know this area extremely well. I played in there when I was a child. I used to go shooting rabbits and whatever in my younger days. And this is in the green wedge, granted, but the 2 fields that are coming down the hill are very large. In fact, they're larger than those 3 put together. So you still have a considerable amount of green wedge left if that was developed. Also, I would prefer this to be developed than the possibilities of ones in Barn Lane, because the access is better. You've got a walkway to the school, which is literally across the road, so that would make life easier. And I know we shouldn't, you're going to tell me off for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you compare this to Exmouth 20, Exmouth 20 hasn't got a snowballs compared to this with the access and the level ground and the not destroying any particular areas of woodland and things like that. So I can't see how you can be against this, but for Exmouth 20. I know it shouldn't be compared, but I feel obliged to. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bailey. I'm going to propose the recommendation as written from the chair. The delegated authority was to Ed in consultation with me, so I saw this before this meeting and broadly agree. Actually, does that make me predetermined, Mr. Hunter?
Not unless you made your mind up beforehand.
Well, in the sense that I agreed with Ed that this should be brought back to ask committee to take it out.
Well, my understanding, if you feel that you've made a final decision on it before it came back to committee and was debated, then you would have predetermined yourself. But if you were still just saying that you thought it should come back to committee to be debated by them, and then you would make your final decision, then you haven't predetermined the issue. It's how you felt about it at the time.
I think I probably had predetermined it, actually, so I'm not going to propose
Okay, well,
that.
So then if somebody else can obviously...
Point of order.
Yeah.
You haven't taken the recommendations for the previous items, but you're taking the recommendations for this. I thought we were just going to take all of the recommendations right at the end.
So as my suggestion is that as these are very specifically about things that are in this chapter, we do these now. The other recommendations cover the whole plan, not just the amendments to the policies that were in there, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm suggesting we take these now. But I'm not going to propose, and I'll abstain from voting because I think I've already decided
I'm happy
before I
to
came in.
propose that
So
we
we have a
support the
proposal
officer's
from
recommendation.
So we have a proposal from Councillor Jess Bailey. Councillor Fernley, are you seconding that? Okay.
You sit down.
Yeah, I'm not going to vote. So we have a proposal then that's, just to check, that's recommendation 4 as written in officer's report to take Budley 01 out?
Yes.
Yep, okay, just making sure there. So we have a proposal to take Budley 01 out from Councillor Jess Bailey. Are there any further comments? No? Okay, in which case then, all those in favour of that proposal, please. I count 6. Those against, 3, and those abstaining, that's 2. Okay, so that is carried then. Thank you, members. We come then to, we'll do the other site where officers are asking us to look at it specifically, and that's Otto 02. Mr. Freeman, can you just briefly remind us the issue here, please?
Yes, so the issue here is twofold, really. One, this was a site that the members resolved to allocate for up to 8 dwellings, but is within flood zone, needs to be go through the strategic flood risk assessment stage 2. It hasn't done. To do so and do the relevant modelling would cost over £10,000. You have subsequently agreed to include the site within the settlement boundary anyway, so in principle it can come forward as it's within the settlement boundary even without an allocation. So the recommendation is that rather than do the additional work, which would cause delay to the plan, I would point out, as well as the costs associated with that, that we simply remove the allocation but leave it within the settlement boundary so that it can come forward anyway, even without the allocation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Ledger, then Councillor Jess Bailey.
Happy to propose that, Chair. Can I ask a question on general sites? So
once I've looked for a seconder, yes, you can. Councillor Jess Bailey, I saw first. Do you want to say anything?
No, that seems completely sensible.
Okay, Councillor Ledger.
So as part of, this site wasn't originally allocated by or recommended to be allocated by officers, so that they didn't have time to do the additional work. Can I get assurances that the additional work has been done to all other allocated sites namely Exmouth 20, because that was previously wasn't proposed as being allocated by officers, and the committee have made that decision. So it's just to ensure that all of the additional works have been done for all of the other remaining sites.
Yes, so through you, Chair, this is the only one I'm bringing back because of this issue. I don't think there were flooding issues specifically with Exmo 20 off the top of my head, but if there were, that's already been covered in the SFRA work that we've done. This is the site that causes those issues, and it's not just the additional work; it's the extent of the additional work, because you'd need to do various modelling work of watercourses and flood zones in this case, so it's the scale of the work as well as it needed to be bolted on. We did bolt on some further stage 2 SFRA work after the allocations, but where it was a lighter touch approach that was needed and could be done in the timescales. This one, it's quite a heavy duty piece of work that would be needed, so it doesn't make sense in terms of timescales and costs to do it in this particular case. All the other sites would be covered there.
Councillors Young, Ingham, Fernley, in that order.
There was 2 sites proposed in Otterton. We turned the one down off Back Lane, and we thought this one was pretty well a suitable infill, and we supported it. So that means that both suggestions for any development in Otterton won't come forward in the local plan, but they're going to be in the built-up area boundary. Did Otterton have a built-up area boundary previously? I can't remember if it had or not, but I do notice that there's one village that hasn't got a built-up area boundary. Seeing it's in national landscape, it's in the coastal preservation area, national landscape, it's got all the protections on it. I'm just, the other one we were discussing with Budley, we're removing the boundary from it, but these 2 will still be in the built-up area boundary. So do we want developers in the future to come forward with that or not? That's my question.
So just to reassure you, the other site at Otterton would still be allocated. We're not proposing to unallocate that, so the work has been done because we had recommended allocation of that site, so we knew in advance that work would be needed, or thought it would be. In terms of, I'm pretty sure Otterton had a built-up area boundary before, he says, looking across to Mr. Dickens. Okay, apparently not in the villages plan. But I mean, I think it meets all of the criteria we're working to in terms of the current assessment, and obviously I acknowledge, you know, it's in the national landscape, but equally so is Budleigh Salterton, and we've always had a settlement boundary around Budleigh Salterton. So I don't think that's. I think there's an acceptance even in the national landscape that within settlement boundaries, developments will come forward, and that in itself is not such an issue. Is more the expansion on the edges of those boundaries, as we were looking at Budlow 1 a minute ago, that caused greatest concern in terms of national landscape impacts at those settlements. But it's a settlement with a good range of services and facilities for Tier 4 settlement, so I think it justifies a settlement boundary and some modest growth coming forward in line with the spatial strategy, which I think the plan still accommodates with the allocation that remains. And as I say, this site adjacent to North Star could still come forward through an application process being within the settlement boundary, but it would then put the onus on the applicants to do the modelling work for the flood risk assessment.
In that case, I would like to propose that, yes, we exclude the one at North Star.
I think it's already been proposed and seconded,
Right.
But thank you, Jeff. It was Councillor Ledger and I think Councillor Jess Bailey seconded it? Yes, okay. I was then going to come to, was it you, Councillor Ingham?
It was, Chair, thank you. based on what we see, I think an observer or resident from Otterton may well say, well, why on earth, at the early stage, didn't you just cross these two off the list? Because we've crossed one off, included one, and then we've taken the second one out, and then we've put in the built-up area boundary. So they'd be, in my mind, they'd be forgiven for saying, well, what the hell do you want there? You know, if one's in, why isn't the other? Are they both out? Or are they both probably going to be developed because you've done a built-up area boundary? Do you see what I'm saying? So, you know, this is where we leave ourselves wide open for, you know, what is your intent here? And it seems to me, as Ed said, that these two sites will come forward, you know, and all we're trying to do is save 10 grand while that happens. But people will say, as you know, Councillor Young was saying, you know, well, look at the designations. Look at what you've done there, and then you're saying it will be okay anyway because you've just created a built-up area boundary, meaning, you know, East Devon. That's what they'll say. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ingham. Any further comments on this point? Councillor Fernley?
No.
This relates back to Councillor Ledger's comment about this was a site that was not recommended by officers and it hasn't had all the flood risks done. And I just want to make sure belt and braces that Broadclist 12 that wasn't recommended had also had its flood risk done. If it wasn't done for this one, why would it be done for Broadclist 12B? Thank you.
Well, my understanding is that all of these sites, there's different levels of work that would be needed depending on the constraints to those sites. So this site particularly causes us an issue because of the level of modelling work that would be needed to take it to that next level in terms of the flood risk assessment work. I believe some of the other sites that members allocated that we hadn't recommended for allocation have been done as additional work through the consultants for the strategic flood risk assessment. So my understanding is this is the only one where we're not proposing to do that work because of the scale of what's involved and the fact that it's now within the settlement boundary anyway. So my understanding is all of the others have either already been through in terms of the strategic flood risk assessment work or have subsequently now been going through that process. So I'm not aware of any other issues in terms of the SFRA work. So there shouldn't be anything to worry about with that site.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'm going to take us to a vote then on the proposal by Councillor Ledger, seconded by Councillor Jess Bailey, to remove Otto 02 from the Regulation 19 draft. All those in favour, please. Eight in favour. Those against? 2, and those abstaining? 1. That adds up. Okay, thank you very much, members. We come then to Councillor Faithful.
Issue with Tipton site before you go barging on.
So we are literally coming to the rest of chapter 5 now. So this is the correct moment for Councillor Faithful to intervene. But we're not talking about specific site allocation decisions today. If there's an issue with the wording of a
what
policy.
was agreed is different to what is written down on the document, as far as I can see.
Then
It's
that
about the
is
5
something.
Self-build houses. The school was supposed to be going on this. If the school was to go on the site, there'll be 5 self-build houses alongside it. It now says the self-build houses will be there whether or not the school is there, so long as the school is somewhere in Tipton. And that was not what was agreed. It also means that the site, without altering the entrance to the site, it's impossible to turn right coming out of there. So it's not workable for 5 self-build houses unless they're going to be multi-million-pound self-build houses to cover the cost of closing off the lane and major road alterations to the entrance to the site.
Okay, thank you for highlighting that problem, Councillor Faithful, and you're right, that is an error, so that will be amended. Thank you. Other comments elsewhere in this chapter where there are issues like the ones Councillor Faithful has just raised, bearing in mind that we are not revisiting individual site allocation decisions. I'm sorry for labouring that point, but it's an important one. Councillor Jess Bailey.
I agree with Councillor Faithful, but on Ottery, I think I raised last time that Ottery 09, the plan is shown, so Ottery 09, which is Devon County Council site, I'm a Devon County councillor, that we agreed, the wording says that it's a mixed site, education and housing. I made the point last time that the shading shouldn't just show housing, but it hasn't been changed and it still just shows a vast housing site. The plan needs to be changed to reflect the fact that it's a mixed site. And I did actually say exactly the same thing last time, and it was agreed that that would be amended. Please.
Yes, through Chair, that's correct. I'm just looking at the annotation because we've gone housing and employment rather than mixed use. We perhaps need to look at how we pick up sites where it's housing and another use that's not employment. But yes, happy to take that away and we can look at the annotation on the plan for Ottery St Mary.
Okay, thank you. Any other issues of that ilk, members?
Not of that ilk, but I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm actually going to pick up Exmouth 20, land at St John's. I've read it a few times and I'm not querying the allocation or anything else at this point, but I do wish to raise, as the public has, we don't anywhere in this raise the issue of the Pebble Bed Heath, Triple SI and the 400 metres mitigation zone that we should not ideally be building in. I know it's in other policies, but surely we should just be highlighting it to any further developer that the northern part of this site has its issues to overcome, something like that.
Through Chair, I mean, I think we did discuss this when we looked at this. We could put some text in that refers to that. What we tried to avoid in terms of the text that goes with each allocation is repeating policy requirements that are set out elsewhere in the plan. And there is a policy elsewhere in the plan that says about the 400 metre exclusion zone in terms of the Pebble Bed Heaths. So I don't necessarily see a need to state it in terms of XMO 20, but we can do if members want us to add in a sentence to just make that clear.
Can we just put in a sentence that says any allocation needs to comply with policy PB04, just so that the issue is explicitly covered, if only for the benefit of the public. Okay, other issues. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just carrying on from Mike's question, the site you mentioned, the access, there are 3 proposals, if memory serves. One on the main road to Budley Salterton near the Archery Club, which is way too far out of town. It's going to put a long journey into Exmouth, and it's not sustainable from that one. The other one is through Southern Wood, which is a very quiet, well-designed cul-de-sac. And at the back of there, there's some ancient woodland, a track, which it's been suggested will be demolished for an entrance there, which is highly unsuitable because it will come out of the cul-de-sac onto a bend which is the Dinham Way. Whatever highways thought of when they said it'd be fine, I just do not know. And the other one, a possibility, is going up to the back of the industrial estate by McDonald's. And that again has to be accessed through land which I believe is owned by the same landowner. And that is going through ancient forest again. So I'd just like to try and highlight some protection for those areas, please, if that's possible.
Mr. Freeman, I think I'd be right in saying that will be in later chapters of the plan that are concerned with the natural environment. Is that right?
Well, there's certainly policies that protect ancient woodlands and natural assets in the plan. I think in terms of the accesses, my recollection is that there's some limited scope for access at that southern point onto Dinham Way because of the issues that Councillor Bailey raises. And so I think we did highlight when members were considering this site that the primary access would need to be out by the archery club and that was out of the town. So that was made clear when members made that allocation. So those would be the two access points as I see it, albeit, as I say, access at that southern point would have to be limited because of the constraints of the highway at that point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernley.
I've been asked to question why the 0.1 hectare of employment land has disappeared from Broadcliffe 29. I understand the concept of the master plan, and I think that's a really good idea. But from the clerk, where Broadcliffe
So yeah, I'm going to stop you there because that was raised by email, and I think that was just an error in drafting the paperwork, wasn't it, Ed? Because that correspondence was shared by email.
Yes, I thought we'd addressed it in this iteration of the plan, though. I'm just having a look. August 29. So yes, there was. So no, it's not in there as 0.1 for 29. We've got 0.6 at August 12, haven't we? And then the two being master plan together, but not the 0.1 at August 29. So no, that needs to be added in because that was part of the original resolution. Was that was 0.1.
So that
we'll
is
add
just
in.
an error, but thank you for spotting that. Councillor Fernley. Any other comments on sites within this chapter? Councillor Roy Collins.
On E18, the agent is Carter Jonas. Carter Jonas are also agents for National Highways. They deal with all aspects of National Highways land. Sorry, I'm just getting this right. SLR, who have drawn up the road junction plans, they're also National Highways architects for drawing up road plans. They're not independent, they're all pushing together to get this development done. So we're not getting a proper aspects from them, I don't feel. Also, I'd like to speak about the actual land. The fields there, the name of the field is Town Lakes. Surely Town Lakes means there's a lot of water there. There is a brook down the bottom of the field. There's also a leat that runs across the field. The leat was Honiton's main water supply before the 1920s. There's an iron gutter down through the high street. People used to come out with their jugs and dip the water up. That's what they used. There's a lot of springs in that particular field. In the area further up, you've got the name Springfield, Waterleet. There's an awful lot of water in this land. It should not be built on, I feel. It's historic value, because it was Honiton's ancient water supplies, which is still there. Up
Thank you,
until
Councillor Collins.
reorganisation, the Borough Council used to keep the water supply up.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. As I said, we're not revisiting decisions to allocate or not individual sites today
I'd like
because
to-
those decisions have been made, with the exception of the two that Mr Freeman needed to highlight.
I'd like to point out that there's been no public consultation on this site.
Councillor Collins,
Honiton
we've-
Town Council know nothing of it. I spoke to the town clerk last week. I was wondering how East Devon Council were going to make the residents aware of this site.
So we've discussed this on a number of occasions before, Councillor Collins, so I'm not going to go over old ground there. Residents will have the opportunity to comment in the consultation that's upcoming in the new year, and that will be publicised, as all of our consultations are, to residents and to the Town Council. So there will be an opportunity to comment. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Is now an appropriate time to talk about the Newton Poppleford boundary? Or I know that the ward member, because we had a revised boundary, was that this afternoon? I'm happy to wait.
Chris is certainly down to
Yeah,
speak this
okay, I'll wait till
afternoon.
this afternoon. Thank you.
Not sure where the settlement boundaries are in the paperwork.
I'll wait,
Which
that's
chapter
fine.
they are. This says chapter 6 regarding settlement boundaries, but chapter 6 is mitigating climate change.
As the ward member's not here, I'm happy to wait.
That's actually chapter 3. So we have already been through it. We'll come back to it and tackle it at the start of the afternoon, as that's when Councillor Burrup is coming. Any other comments on the allocation strategies, allocation policies? Okay, well, that's resounding silence then. So we will come then to the end of the morning session with one thing that we missed out from the start of the morning session, which was to consider the minutes of the previous meeting, which were supposed to be on my script but weren't in the end for whatever reason. So did anybody have any comments on those 4 sets of minutes from, let me just get the dates, the 1st of November, the 5th of November, the 22nd of November, or the 29th of November? No, okay, in which case I'll take it that those are all agreed, and I will sign those appropriately. That brings us to the end of the morning session then. We're going to reconvene at 2 o'clock, I think it is. I'm looking the script. Afternoon session, not before 2 p.m. So we will reconvene, members, at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.